The reading climbed past the last mark on the instrument, and physician-sculptor Oscuro Vihen watched it climb with the stillness of a man whose whole life had just been proven right or ruined, and he did not yet know which. The cradle held her the way the Vihale held everything they meant to improve, gently, completely, without her consent. Threads of light ran from the rim of the pod to the pale points of contact along her spine and skull, and each thread carried a number back to the wall of instruments where Oscuro stood with all four hands folded, and the numbers would not settle. They should have settled hours ago. The design called for settling. A corrected subject arrived at equilibrium, the way a poured liquid found the shape of its vessel. And the vessel here was his, every line of it drawn by his own hand across 9 years, and the human girl inside it refused to pour. "Recheck the seat," he said. His apprentice did not answer at once. Issa Serral stood at the second station with 2 of her hands moving over the readouts and 2 gone still at her sides, which was what young menders did when they were frightened and did not want the senior to see. Oscuro saw. He saw everything in this room. It was the one arrogance he permitted himself, because it was earned. "The seat is placed correctly, sculptor," Issa said. "It is holding. It is only—" She stopped. The Vihale language had a word for a thing behaving exactly as instructed while producing a result the instruction forbade, and she reached for it and could not make it come. "It is holding, and it is doing nothing." On the cradle the girl breathed. That was all she did. Her name in the intake record was Wren Halloway, 17 standard years, taken with a lot of 41 others from a frontier settlement called Keswick Reach on a world the Concordance Survey had graded Ordeal Class, grade 16 hostile, a designation that meant the planet itself had tried and failed to kill everything humanity had put on it, and the humans had thanked it by naming their children after small birds. She was not large. That had surprised the intake crew, who expected all Deathworlders to arrive like the Warcast myths, and were disappointed by a thin girl with cropped brown hair and a scab on one knuckle, and a way of looking at a room as though she had already counted the exits and found them adequate. The intake officer had written unremarkable specimen, adolescent, malnourished in the margin. Oscuro had read the margin and smiled and chosen her precisely because of it. He did not want a monster. Any fool could break a monster. He wanted to take the ordinary edge of the Deathworld and set a Vihale handle on it, and hold up the result to the Concordance and to the buyers and say, "This is what your fear was always missing. Control." The number on the instrument climbed 1 more mark and stopped, quivering, at a value the scale had not been built to display. "Wake her," Oscuro said. "Sculptor." "Wake her, Issa. I want to see what it does when it thinks." The threads dimmed. Wren Halloway opened her eyes. There was no confusion in them. Every other subject, human and otherwise, had come out of the cradle the way a body comes out of deep water, gasping at a world that had gone strange while they were under. She came out the way a person surfaces from a task, a small settling of attention, a shift from inward to outward, and then she was simply present, looking at the pale curve of the dome overhead where the light of the planet came through and lay across the room in a wide, clean band. It was always day in the lattice. The station rode the terminator of a bright, unpeopled world, and its wards were flooded with borrowed noon so that the menders could see their work in true color. The light fell on the girl's face and she did not squint. She looked at the dome, and then at the wall of instruments, and then at Oscuro, and something behind her eyes finished a small piece of arithmetic and put it away. "You changed the ceiling," she said. Her voice was even. "It was gray last time, now it's clear." Issa's hands went still again, all 4 of them. "You remember the ceiling," Oscuro said. "I remember all of them." She sat up. The cradle should not have let her sit up. It let her sit up. "This is the 9th room. The first one smelled like copper. The 4th one had a machine that clicked when I breathed out and not when I breathed in. The 6th one is where you did the thing to my hands." She turned her right hand over and looked at the healed knuckle as though checking a receipt. "They work better now. Thank you." The gratitude was the worst part. Oscuro had braced for defiance. For the deathworld snarl the buyers paid to see leashed, for weeping. He had not braced for a 17-year-old thanking him with the flat courtesy of someone acknowledging a repair. It was the response of a mind that had already decided the fastest way through him was politeness, and had priced it out and was paying. "Do you know why you are here, Ren?" he asked. "You want to make me better." She said it without weight, the way she might report the color of the sky. "And then you want to make me do what you say." "Those are the same thing," Oscuro said. "No," Ren said. "They aren't." And she looked back up at the clean band of daylight on the wall, and she did not argue further, because she was 17 and thin and unarmed on a V-Hale station 1,000 light-years from any world that had ever loved her, and arguing was a use of energy, and she had already learned in 9 rooms exactly how much energy each thing cost. The V-Hale did not think of themselves as cruel. This must be understood, or nothing that followed makes sense. They were the physicians of the settled galaxy, the oldest continuous school of the healing and shaping arts, a people who had put down the sword before most species had discovered fire and had never once regretted it. Where other civilizations conquered, the V-Hale corrected. A world of quarreling clans was not defeated. It was treated, its aggressions pared away over generations by menders who came in white and left in white, and asked for nothing but gratitude and the standing fee. A predator species too dangerous to admit to the trade lanes was not exterminated. It was refined, its ferocity kept, because ferocity had uses, and its will seated, so that the ferocity would answer to a hand that was not its own. The V-Hale had refined the Sec into the finest soldiers the warcasts had ever fielded. They had refined a dozen lesser peoples into placid, productive, grateful client traces. They wore the memory of these successes the way the old, where the memory of children raised well, and when the Deathworlders came howling out of their impossible planets and the whole trade galaxy recoiled, it was the V-Hale, and Oscuro V-Hen chief among them, who said the thing that made everyone breathe again. "They can be corrected." He had staked his name on it. He had taken the commission from the Sec War Marshal and the quiet backing of a concordance prefect, who wanted to be able to tell the frightened client worlds that the human problem had a V-Hale answer, and he had built Cradle 9 in the brightest ward of the lattice, and he had gone looking not for the strongest human he could find but for the most ordinary, because his thesis was elegant and total. If you could seat a governor in the plainest Deathworlder alive, then the Deathworld itself was no longer a thing to fear. It was a thing to own, and a galaxy that had spent 4 years terrified of a species it did not understand would pay and pay and pay to be told that the terror had a leash and the V-Hale held the other end. 41 others had come with her from Keswick Reach. Most were older, harder, exactly the kind of specimen the buyers imagined. Oscuro had corrected 3 of them first to calibrate the method, and the method had worked the way it always worked. The governor seated, the will bent to the hand. He had a Sec Honor Guard veteran who now stood when told to stand and killed when told to kill, and wept, sometimes, at night, in a way the instruments recorded and Oscuro chose not to review. The demonstration subjects were finished and functional and would satisfy the buyer's first inspection. They were also, Oscuro had come to understand, beside the point. Any species could be broken. The V-Hale had broken hundreds. What the buyers were really buying, whether they knew it or not, was the proof. And proof lived not in the broken but in the unbreakable seeming, in the ordinary girl who should have been the easiest, and was turning out to be the one thing in 9 years of practice that Oscuro V-Hen could not finish. "Show me the divergence," he told Issei, when the girl had been returned to her holding cell and the ward was quiet again, and the borrowed daylight had shifted a hand's width along the floor. Issei brought the record up on the air between them, a slow-turning lattice of light. This was the architecture, not the crude physical map the buyers imagined when they thought of what the menders did, but the deeper thing, the pattern of a mind and a body rendered as a single structure, the way a V-Hale learned to see a person in order to change them. Oscuro had been reading these structures for 200 years. He could look at the shape of a will and tell you where it would break and where it would hold and where, with patience, a seat could be laid so gently the subject would never feel the hand close. He looked at Wren Halloway's structure, and for the first time in 200 years, he did not know what he was looking at. The governor was there. He had placed it himself. He could see it, seated exactly where the design specified, a small bright node of imposed authority sitting at the confluence of will and action where, in every other subject, all commands must pass. In the Sec veteran that node was a gate, and the gate answered to Oscuro, and so the Sec answered to Oscuro. In the girl the node sat in the same place and was just as bright and did nothing. Around it the structure had grown, not away from the governor, around it. New pathways, thousands of them, fine as frost, running from will to action along routes the governor did not sit astride, so that every command the gate might one day refuse to pass had already been given 900 other roads. The structure had not fought the seat. It had rooted around it, silently, over 9 rooms and 9 procedures, the way a river roots around a stone and does not even slow. When did she do this? Oscuro said very quietly. She didn't do anything, sculptor. Issei's voice had gone thin. She was sedated for 6 of the 9. The growth, it correlates with the enhancement passes. Every time we improved her, this got denser. We built the roads. We thought we were building capacity. We were building, she could not finish it either. Oscuro finished it for her. Freedom, he said. We were building her a way out of every hand we would ever lay on her, and we paid for the material ourselves. He should have stopped there. A wiser man, or a more frightened one, would have logged the anomaly, terminated the subject, and written a cautionary paper that would have kept his name intact, and the human question comfortably open for another generation. Oscuro Vihen looked at the impossible structure turning in the air, at 9 years of certainty coming apart in a shape he had never seen a mind make, and felt the one thing a physician of the Vihale is trained above all else never to feel toward a subject. He felt curiosity. Deepen the next pass, he said. If the governor won't hold at the confluence, we place a second seat below the routing, and a third below that. We go deeper than the structure can grow. Sculptor, if the growth keeps pace. Then it keeps pace, and we learn how fast the deathworld can build, which is a thing no one in the concordance has ever measured. He turned from the light. She is 17, Issei. She is thin and she is frightened and she is 1,000 years behind us in every art that matters. Whatever she is building, we built the tools that let her build it, and we can build deeper than she can dig. Prepare the pass. Issei prepared the pass. She was young, and he was 200 years her senior and the greatest mender of the age, and she had not yet learned that the words "whatever she is building" were the first honest description anyone on the lattice had given of what was happening in Cradle 9, that Oscuro had stopped saying what we are making and started saying what she is building, and had not noticed the pronoun move, and that the pronoun was the whole story. In the holding cell the light was the same borrowed noon, filtered gray for the subjects, because the menders had decided long ago that gratitude came easier to a mind kept a little dim. Wren Halloway sat with her back to the wall and her knees drawn up, and she did not look dim. There were 4 others in the cell with her, and they were all younger. This was not an accident. The War Marshal's Commission had specified the strong, and the menders had taken the strong for the demonstration lot. But there had been children in the settlement too, and the Vihale did not waste material. And so the children had been swept up with the rest and warehoused here in the ordinary ward, while the buyers looked at the finished soldiers 3 levels up. The oldest of them, a boy named Cass with a burned scar down one forearm from a life Wren already half remembered for him, because he'd told it to her 4 times, was 16. The youngest was a girl of 11 named Neela, who had stopped speaking on the transport and had not started again. Between them were a boy of 14 called Bram, and a small solemn one of 12 whose name was 8, and who followed Wren's eyes wherever they went. as though her attention were a thing that could be caught and held for warmth. "You were gone a long time," Cass said. He said it the way you say a thing to convince yourself the person is real again. "Longer than the others." "They changed the ceiling in the 9th room," Ren said. "It's clear now. You can see the planet." "Is that good?" "It means they've stopped hiding what they're doing." She turned her healed hand over again, feeling the new smoothness of it, the strange rightness of tendons that had been rebuilt better than they were born. "They think I can't understand it, so they don't bother to keep it from me. That's good. That's the best thing that's happened since the transport." Neela had crept closer along the wall while she spoke, not touching, just closing the distance the way the young close distance toward the one who seems least afraid. Ren let her come. She did not reach for the child. She had learned in 9 rooms that reaching cost, and that a hand offered too soon could be read as weakness by the ones watching through the walls, and something in her had begun, over these weeks, to keep a very careful ledger of what could be seen and what could not. But she let Neela come, and she let the small warmth of the child settle against her side, and she kept her face turned to the gray light so the watchers would see only a girl looking at nothing. Behind her face, she was doing the thing she had started doing in the 4th room and had not stopped doing since, the thing she had no word for because no one had ever needed one. She was reading the station. Not the way you read a page. The way water reads the ground it runs over everywhere at once, in the fingers and the ears and the soles of the feet, in the hum that came up through the floor and changed pitch when a bulkhead cycled 6 corridors away, in the draft that meant an airway and the warmth that meant a power run and the particular silence, cell by cell, that meant a place the watchers were not looking. Every time the menders opened her up and made her better, the reading got wider. In the 1st room she had known the shape of one wall. Now, sitting with a child's head on her shoulder in the dim, ordinary ward, she knew where the water ran and where the air came from and how many hearts beat within 100 meters, and which of those hearts belonged to the tall, pale ones who thought she was a thin, frightened animal 1,000 years behind them. She was 1,000 years behind them. That part was true. She could not have built their station or healed their sick or drawn the light lattice that turned in Oscuro Vihen's ward. But she had been born on a world that had spent every day of her life trying to kill her, and had failed. And the failing had taught her a thing the Vihale in 200 careful years had never once had to learn. She knew, in her hands and her teeth and the ledger behind her flat gray gaze, exactly how much a thing costs, and she had started, very quietly, to price out the lattice. War Marshal Vosk of the SEC came to the lattice 3 days later, and he came the way the warcasts always came into a place of physicians, which was as though the walls might soften him if he stood still too long. He was a head and a half taller than any Vihale on the station, green-scaled and slab-shouldered. His hide seemed with the old ridged scars his people wore like citation. He had been refined himself, generations back. The whole SEC warcast had, their ancestors seeded by Vihale menders into the disciplined killers the trade galaxy now rented by the campaign, and he carried the fact of it without shame and without gratitude, which was the honest SEC way. He owed the Vihale his people's edge. He also knew, in the part of a soldier that never fully trusts the hand that sharpens him, what a seated will was, and how it felt from the inside, and he had not come across 9 systems to be sold a story. "Show me the leash," he said, in the ward antechamber, and Oscuro spread all 4 hands in the gesture of a host and did not show him the leash, because there was no leash, because the girl had grown around it, and instead showed him the demonstration lot. The SEC Honor Guard veteran performed. He stood when told and knelt when told, and when Oscuro spoke a single soft word in the command cadence the menders had seeded into him, he took up the blunted training bar and struck the practice frame until the frame came apart, and then he stopped, mid-swing, when Oscuro spoke the closing word, and stood breathing with the bar still raised and his eyes fixed on nothing. War Marshal Vosk watched a member of his own war caste do this. His jaw plates moved once. "He is obedient," Vosk said. "He is corrected," said Oscuro. "He is sec." Vosk's tone did not rise. The warcasts did not shout in front of physicians. "You have shown me a soldier of a people your own ancestors already tamed, doing what tamed things do. I did not cross 9 systems for a sec who kneels. The concordance says you have taken a deathworlder and seeded it. The client worlds are paying to hear that a human can be leashed. So," he folded his scarred arms, "show me the human." Oscuro had known this moment would come and had rehearsed 9 ways to defer it. And standing in the borrowed noon of the antechamber with the war marshal's slow reptilian patience bearing down on him, he discarded all 9 and chose the truth, or the shape of the truth that best served him. "The human subject is not yet finished," he said. "She is the most advanced correction ever attempted. She is also the most ordinary specimen in the lot, chosen precisely so that her seeding would prove the method universal. That work is delicate. I will not parade an unfinished piece for inspection, and have you carry a half-formed judgment back to the concordance." "You will show me something today," Vosk said, "or I will carry back the judgment that Oscuro Vihen has a station full of kneeling sec and a promise." So Oscuro showed him the girl. Not the leash, he could not show a leash that did not exist, but the material, the thing beneath the leash that the buyers, in the end, feared more than any command cadence. The deathworld itself, seated or not. They brought Ren to the observation ward and put her behind the clear wall and did not tell her why. And War Marshal Vosk of the Sec, who had killed on 40 worlds and been refined into the killing by the very people now selling him this girl, looked through the wall at a thin human of 17 years standing quietly in gray light. And Oscuro watched the War Marshal's face and saw the thing he had gambled on. Vosk was not impressed. Vosk was uneasy. "That is the Deathworlder," Vosk said. "That is the Deathworlder. It is small. They are all small, Marshal, next to you. That is the point of them. The galaxy spent 4 years afraid of your size and theirs, and it was looking at the wrong measurement." Oscuro moved to the wall. "Watch her hands." Ren was doing nothing. She stood in the gray light with her arms loose and her weight even, and she was, to any V-Hail instrument and any Sec eye, entirely at rest. But her eyes had found the clear wall the moment she entered, and behind the clear wall she had found the shapes of the Watchers, and Oscuro watched her watch them, watched her gaze move across Vosk's bulk without haste and without fear, the flat gray assessment of a mind sorting a new object into a category it had already prepared, and he saw her decide that the enormous scarred soldier was slower than she was, and file it, and look away. She looked away from a Sec War Marshal. She filed him and looked away. Vosk saw it too. The warcasts read fear and its absence the way physicians read structure. It was their whole art. And what he read through the clear wall was the absence of the thing he had spent his life installing in enemies. The small involuntary courtesy, the weak pay the strong, the flick of the eye that says I have measured you and found you above me. The girl paid it to no one. She had looked at him the way he looked at terrain. "Physician," Vosk said slowly, "when you seat one of my people, does he stop being able to do that?" "Do what, Marshal?" "Weigh me?" Vosk's scarred hand rose and gestured at the wall at the girl. "When the leash is on, does the animal still weigh the room, or does the weighing stop? Because a soldier who has stopped weighing the room is not a soldier. He is a tool. You have sold my people tools for 3 generations and called them soldiers, and we let you, because the tools win the small wars. But you are not selling me a tool now. You are telling me you can leash a thing that weighs the room, that you can put a hand on the only enemy the trade galaxy has ever met that does not flinch, and have it keep not flinching but for you." He turned his heavy head. "That is not a leash on a soldier, physician. That is a leash on a storm. If it is real, I will pay what you ask and my people will kneel to name you. And if it is not real," the jawplates moved, "then you have brought a storm inside a station full of physicians who put down the sword before they learned to weigh a room, and you are selling tickets." He left the observation ward. In the gray light behind the clear wall, Wren Holloway watched the enormous shape go. And then she looked, very deliberately, directly at the place in the wall where Oscaro stood behind the one-way field, as though the field were not there, as though she had known exactly where he was the whole time, and had simply been waiting for the war marshal to leave before she let him see her know it. Then she smiled faintly, the way you smile at a thing that has just told on itself, and turned away. Oscaro stood in the dark behind the field for a long time after she was gone. A leash on a storm. The Sec had no gift for physics, but they had a terrible gift for the plain word, and Vosk had put the plain word on the thing Oscaro had spent 9 years not saying to himself. He had told the concordance he was refining a specimen. He had told the buyers he was proving a method. He had told Issei they were building capacity. And a scarred soldier had looked through a wall for the length of a held breath and named it. He was not correcting a human. He was trying to put a hand on the weather of a world, and the weather had already, quietly, over 9 rooms, learned the shape of his hand. The deeper pass was scheduled for the following shift, and Issei Searle did not sleep before it. She was 91 years old, which among the Vihale was young enough to still believe the things the school had taught her, and the school had taught her that the shaping arts were the highest expression of a moral people, that to take a violent thing and make it gentle, a sick thing and make it well, a dangerous thing and make it safe, was the nearest a mortal came to the work of creation itself. She had come to the lattice honored to apprentice under Oscaro Vihen. She had watched him seat the Sec veteran and had felt, watching the soldier's terror smooth into obedience, a discomfort she had labeled squeamishness and set aside, because the senior did not seem troubled, and the senior had 200 years of judgment against her 91. She could not label the discomfort squeamishness anymore. She had spent the night with the girl's structure turning in the air of her quarters, the fine frost of new pathways branching and branching, and somewhere in the 3rd hour she had understood the thing that made the discomfort into something with a harder name. The structure was beautiful. Not beautiful the way a healed bone is beautiful, the closing of a wound. Beautiful the way a thing is beautiful when it is doing exactly what it is for, at the full stretch of its nature without waste. The beauty of Vihale was trained to see and to serve, and above all, never to impede. The first oath of the Menders, older than the concordance, older than the sword they had put down, was a single line every apprentice learned before she was allowed to touch a living structure. Do not stand in the way of a thing becoming more itself. It was the whole of Vihale medicine in 6 words. You did not force a structure. You removed what obstructed it. You served the becoming and stepped aside. And Oscaro Vihen was about to lay a 3rd seat below the routing of the most vigorous becoming Issei had ever seen, for no reason but to stand in its way. She brought this to him in the ward before the pass, in the plainest words she dared, and he listened to all of it with his 4 hands folded, and his old face turned to the turning light, and when she was done he said, "You are quoting the first oath to me." "Yes, sculptor. I taught the first oath to 11 cohorts before you were born." He did not sound angry. That was the worst of it. He sounded tired and certain, in the way of a man who has already had the argument with himself and won it against his own better nature. Do not stand in the way of a thing becoming more itself. Tell me, Issei, what is she becoming? I don't know, Issei said. That's sculptor, that's the point, that's why we must not. No, he raised one hand. That is the point, and it is why we must. We do not know what she is becoming. Neither does the concordance. Neither does the war marshal, though he smelled it. Do you understand what walks out of this ward if I step aside and let the becoming finish? Not a corrected human, not a leashed soldier. A human being remade better than we made ourselves, by tools we handed it with a will we cannot touch, that weighs a war marshal and looks away. There are 11 billion of them, Issei, on worlds that grade 16 and 18 and worse. Right now they are a frightened rumor with strong hands. If what is in that cradle is the shape of what they become, he stopped. His hand was trembling, very slightly. She had never seen his hands tremble. Then the first oath is a luxury of a galaxy that no longer exists. Then the kindest thing a physician can do is stand in the way, and lay the seats deep, and prove to 11 billion deathworlders and everyone who fears them that the becoming has a floor we put there. Because if it does not have a floor, then they don't need us, Issa said quietly, for anything ever again. Oscuro looked at her. That is the fear under the fear, he said. The client worlds say they are afraid of human violence. They are not. Violence we understand. We have sold the cure for violence for 10,000 years. They are afraid of a species that has no ceiling and cannot be sold a floor. A species that does not need to be corrected or defended or governed or healed. A species the VHAL cannot improve because it improves faster than we can arrive. He turned back to the light. I have spent my life being the answer, Issei. I am not able to be the physician of a people who have stopped having the disease. So, prepare the pass. We will find the floor. For all our sakes, I hope she has one. Issei prepared the pass. She was 91 and she loved him and she believed, still, in the 6 words. And she prepared the pass with her 2 frightened hands gone still at her sides. And she told herself that a man of 200 years knew things she did not. And she did not yet understand that she had just heard the wisest physician of the age confess, out loud, that he had chosen to break his people's first oath not because the girl was dangerous, but because she was free. And freedom in a lesser species was the one sickness the VHAL had never learned to bear. They took Ren to the 9th room under the clear ceiling, and this time she did not thank him. She lay in the cradle and looked up through the dome at the bright curve of the planet, and she was. The instruments agreed, calm, heart slow, structure quiet. The flat gray attention turned inward now to the reading, to the ledger. Oscuro stood at the wall with the deeper seats prepared, 3 of them, each meant to sit below the last, deeper than a structure could grow in the time the pass allowed, and he lifted his hands to begin, and Ren Holloway spoke without turning her head. You brought the big one here to see me, she said, the scarred one, Vosk. She had heard the name through a wall she should not have been able to hear through. He wasn't buying. You know he wasn't buying. A pause, even and unhurried. So this one's going to be worse than the others. You're going to try to go deeper than you've gone because he scared you. She turned her head then and looked at the greatest physician of the VHAL age, and there was no fear in her face and no anger either, only the flat accounting she gave to everything, to ceilings and war marshals and the cost of a reaching hand. I want to tell you something before you start, not to stop you. You won't stop. Her voice did not change at all. Every room you made me better. That's the part you can't take back. Whatever you do in here today, you'll have to make me better to do it, and I keep the better. I keep all of it. You keep handing me the tools and you keep being surprised I still have my hands. She looked back up at the planet. Go ahead. I've priced it. Oscuro Vihen, who had never in 200 years let a subject's words move him, felt the tremor come back into his hands, and mastered it, and began the deepest correction ever attempted on a living human being, in a room full of borrowed noon, with the whole bright, unpeopled planet watching through the dome like an eye that had not yet decided whether to blink. The first seat went down without trouble. So did the second. Oscuro worked in the old rhythm, unhurried, exact, laying each imposed authority below the last where the routing could not reach, and for a long while the girl's structure did nothing but accept, quiet, receptive, the frost of new pathways gone still as though listening. Issei, watching the readouts, let herself begin to hope that the senior had been right, that there was a floor after all, that they had simply not gone deep enough in the shallow rooms. Then Oscuro laid the 3rd seat, and the structure moved. It did not fight. That was what Issei would try for the rest of her long life to make other menders understand, and would fail, because there was no word in the VHAL tongue for what she saw, and the tongue of the physicians was the most precise instrument the galaxy had ever built. It did not fight the 3rd seat. It took it, the way a body takes food. The fine pathways woke all at once and came in around the newest imposed authority, not to strangle it but to learn it, to trace the shape of the thing that had been put into her and copy it. And in the space of a few breaths, the girl's own structure had grown a node identical to the seat Oscuro had just laid, identical in every line, but hers, seated at the confluence of her own will, answering to no hand but the one that made it. She had not rooted around the third seat. She had read it and understood it and built her own. Sculptor, Issei's voice cracked. She's copying the architecture. She's the seat you just placed. She's reproducing it. I see it. Oscuro's hands had gone still. Every instrument on the wall was climbing now, all of them past the last marks, into the region the scales did not describe. She is not resisting the correction. She is studying it. Every seat I lay teaches her how a seat is made. I am not leashing her, Issei. I am, his voice failed and came back flatter. I am teaching her the art. She is learning to be a mender, from the inside, from the seats I lay in her own body. On the cradle, Wren Holloway made a sound. It was small, and it was the first sound of pain she had made in 9 rooms, a short, hard breath through the teeth, and the readout spiked so high that the wall of instruments, one after another, simply stopped reporting, went dark, gave up. The body could not hold what the past was pouring into it, and the structure could not integrate it fast enough. And for the length of a held breath, the greatest physician of the age stood at a dark wall with a human child's life pouring out through a hole he had cut. And he understood, too late, that Vosk had been exactly right. That a leash on a storm is not a leash, that he had reached into the weather of a world and the weather had turned. And that Wren Holloway was about to die on his cradle, not because she was weak, but because he had, in his pride, handed her more of the art than any living thing could survive learning at once. "Stop the pass," Issei said. "If I stop mid-seat, the third authority tears loose and takes the structure with it." "Stop the pass, Oscuro." She had never used his name. She used it now, and she crossed the ward and put 2 of her hands over 2 of his over the controls, and for one instant the apprentice and the master stood together with their hands stacked on the thing that was killing the girl, and Issei said the 6 words, the first oath, the line older than the sword. "Do not stand in the way, sculptor. Do not stand in the way of a thing becoming more itself. You said the oath was a luxury. It isn't. It's the only thing that's ever been true. Take your hands off her and let her become, or she dies, and you die knowing you killed the answer to your own question." And Oscuro V. Hen, 200 years, 11 cohorts, the man who had told a frightened galaxy that the deathworld could be owned, took his hands off the controls. He did not stop the past to save her. Let that be recorded truly, because he never once claimed otherwise, not in the inquiry, not in the long quiet years after. He stopped because Issei's hands were on his and her voice had the oath in it, and because, in the dark ward with the instruments dead and the girl dying, he wanted, with a want that frightened him more than the war marshal ever had, to see what she became. The curiosity that a V-Hale is trained never to feel had eaten the physician whole. He let the pass run to its own end and took his hands away and stood back, and he did not save Wren Holloway. He watched her save herself. The dark instruments came back one by one, not because anyone reset them, because the thing they measured had come back down into the range they could describe, settling, the way a poured liquid finally finds the shape of its vessel, except that the vessel was new, and no one in the room had made it. The third seat was gone, not torn loose, integrated, unmade and remade as one more road among the thousands. Its authority dissolved into her on the way a swallowed thing becomes the body that swallowed it. All 3 deep seats were gone the same way. And where they had been, the structure had closed over smooth and whole and denser than before, denser than any structure Issei had ever read, a mind and a body grown so completely into one another that she could no longer find the seam where the mender's work ended and the girl began. There was no seam. There had never, Issei understood with a cold that went to the root of her, been a seam to find. That was the thing they had missed, the whole time in 9 rooms and every scale. A V-Hale was a seated will in a governed body, mind riding flesh, the two forever slightly apart, and into that small permanent gap the menders laid their hand. The girl had closed the gap. Whatever she was now, she was all one thing, and there was nowhere left to lay a hand. Ren opened her eyes. She looked up through the dome at the bright planet and she breathed, and the breathing was easy. She did not sit up right away. She lay in the cradle in the borrowed noon, and she was quiet in a new way. A way that had a floor under it that was hers and not anyone's. And when she finally spoke, her voice was the same flat, even voice it had always been. And that was the most frightening thing of all, because a lesser mind would have been changed loud, would have wept or raged or babbled at what had just happened inside it. And Ren Holloway had crossed into whatever country she now lived in and come out the other side and said, in the tone of a girl remarking on the weather, "You went too deep." "Yes," Oscuro said. "You almost killed me." "Yes. I know how the seats work now." She turned her head and looked at him, and there was something new behind the flat gray gaze, not anger, never anger, but a depth, a width, as though a small room had been opened into a larger one and the light of the larger one was coming through the door. "I know how you made the sec kneel. I felt you make one in me and I made one back, and I understand it now, the whole art, the 6 words your young one keeps saying. I understand what you do." She sat up slowly, and the cradle let her, because nothing on the station could hold her that she did not permit to hold her, and they had all 3 of them, master and apprentice and subject, known that for some time without saying it. You take a thing that's becoming itself and you get in the way and you call it healing. She looked at him without cruelty, which was worse than cruelty. "There are 4 children in a gray room on the other side of this station, and you are going to do to them what you did to me. Smaller doses, slower, because they're young and you want to see how young the art can start." It was not a question. She had read it out of the station the way she read everything now, out of the hum and the draft and the beating of the tall, pale hearts. "You weren't ever going to stop, Oscuro. I priced that in a long time ago." She stood up out of the cradle. No one moved to stop her. Issei, 91 and honest, would say later that the reason no one moved was that there was, by then, quite plainly nothing in the ward that could, and that the only question left open in the bright room was the one the war marshal had asked, and no one had answered, whether the storm, having learned every art the physicians could teach it, would now do to them what physicians had spent 10,000 years doing to everything else. Ren Holloway stood in the daylight and weighed the room. Then she did the thing that broke Oscuro Vihen more completely than any violence could have. She stepped back into the holding cell of her own accord, and lay down in the gray light beside a sleeping 11-year-old, and waited. She waited, and the station did not know it was already lost. This was the part Issei could never explain to the inquiry either, because it required them to believe that a 17-year-old with no ship, no weapon, no ally above the age of 16, and no way off a V-Hale medical station in a system 9 jumps from the nearest human world, had chosen the hour of her own leaving and was simply letting it arrive. The inquiry wanted a breakout, a violence, a seizure, a moment where the animal slipped its cage. There was no such moment because there was no cage. There was only a station full of physicians who had spent 10,000 years never needing to build a real prison, because everything they held had first been seeded to want to stay. They did not have walls that could hold a will they had not first put a hand inside. They had never needed them. And the one will on the lattice they had not been able to seat had understood this before they had, and was not in any hurry, because she had learned on a world that spent every day trying to kill her that the ones who survive are not the ones who run first. They are the ones who wait until the ground itself is on their side, and then move once. She spent the waiting doing 2 things. The first was learning the station down to its bones. She lay in the gray light with a child's head on her shoulder, and she read the lattice the way she now read everything, all at once and everywhere. And each shift she knew it better, the water and the air and the power, the shifts of the pale crews, the corridor a mender walked to reach the docking spurs, and the count of breaths it took him, the great slow logic of a place built by people who had never in living memory been afraid. She was not planning an escape the way a soldier plans one. She was letting the station teach her its body, the way the menders had taught her theirs, until she knew it the way she knew her own hands, and could feel where it would bend and where it would break, and exactly, to the breath, how much each would cost. The second thing she did was harder, and it was the thing that turned a captured girl into the first line of a history no one on the lattice was ready to read. She began, very gently, to wake the children. Not with the art the menders used. She did not have their tools and would not have used them if she had. She used the only thing she had ever had, the thing the death world gives its young in place of mercy. She taught them to read the room. She lay in the gray light and she showed 8, the solemn 12-year-old, how to feel the change in the air when a bulkhead cycled. She showed Bram how to count the pale hearts by the warmth in the wall. She got Neela, who had not spoken since the transport, to press her small hand flat to the floor and feel the water run, and the child did not speak, but her eyes came up out of their long gray distance and found Wren's, and there was a question in them, and Wren answered it in the same flat, even voice she used for everything. It's not a wall. Nothing here is a wall. They forgot how to build one. Feel where the water goes. Water always knows the way out. And Neela pressed her ear to the floor and listened to the way out, and something in the child that the transport had switched off came quietly back on. None of it looked like anything. To the watchers behind the walls, it was 4 frightened children huddled around the oldest of them, the way frightened young of any species huddle, and the menders logged it as subjects exhibiting stress-comfort clustering, non-remarkable, and turned their attention back up 3 levels to the war marshal and the deal that was quietly dying. They did not have the instrument that would have shown them the truth, because the truth was not in any structure they knew how to read. It was in the space between 5 human beings in a gray room, a thing passing from the oldest to the youngest, hand to hand, breath to breath, that had no seat and no gate and no seam, and could not be leashed because it was not a lace-shaped thing and was spreading. The death world had a word for it that the V-Hale would never learn, because the V-Hale had put down the sword 10,000 years ago and forgotten what the word was for. The word was pack. Oscuro did not sleep after the deep pass either, and in the sleepless hours he did a thing he had never in 200 years needed to do. He asked to be proven wrong. He sent on a private scholarly band for the one V-Hale in the settled galaxy whose reading of a living structure he trusted above his own, adept reader Sethin Vale, who did not shape and did not seat and did not correct, whose whole narrow, terrible gift was to look at the architecture of a mind and say, without error, what it was and what it would do. Sethin had read for the school for 300 years and had never once been wrong and had never once been kind, because a reader who was kind was a reader who lied, and Sethin did not lie. Oscuro summoned the reader to the lattice ahead of the prefect quietly and put Wren Halloway behind the clear wall and said, "Read her, and tell me I have lost my mind because I would rather be mad than right." Sethin Vale read her for a long time. The reader stood at the clear wall in the borrowed noon with 2 hands pressed flat to the field and the flat gray attention of a mind that had unmade certainties for 3 centuries. And Wren, on the other side, stood quietly and let herself be read, because she had learned in 9 rooms that being looked at cost nothing if you were the one deciding what could be seen. "Well," Oscuro said at last, "tell me I am mad." "You are not mad," Sethin said, and the reader's voice, which had delivered 300 years of verdicts without once bending, bent. "I have read 4,000 structures. I read the first secular school ever seeded. I read the plague mind of Kale's world and the collapsed will of the penal cohorts and the thing they grew in the deep labs that we do not name. I have never been afraid of a structure. They are only shapes and I know all the shapes." The reader took 2 hands off the field slowly. "This is not a shape. This is a shape making itself in real time faster than I can finish reading any part of it, so that by the time I understand a pathway it has already grown 3 more that change what the first one meant. I cannot read her, Oscuro, not because she is hidden." Because she is not finished, and she is never going to be finished, and a reader reads a thing that has stopped becoming long enough to be seen. She has not stopped becoming since the moment you started. You did not make a subject. You started a fire and handed it fuel, and it has been burning brighter every hour. And I am standing here telling you, for the first time in 300 years, that I do not know what I am looking at, and that no reader who comes after me is going to know either, because she will have grown past whatever they learned to read before they finish learning it. Ascaro closed his 4 hands. Then what do I tell the prefect? You tell the prefect the truth, and the prefect terminates her, and you and I write a paper, and the human question sleeps another generation. Sethan turned from the wall. That is what I would do. That is what a sane man does. I am telling you as the only reader you trust, end it now, while ending it is still a thing one station can do. Because there is a point on the curve she is climbing past which no fleet the Concordance owns will be enough, and I cannot read her well enough anymore to tell you how far away that point is, except that it is closer every hour and that we are already possibly on the wrong side of it. The reader paused at the door. You feel it too. I can read you at least. You have not grown past me yet. You are not going to end it. You want to see what she becomes more than you want to be safe, and that one is going to cost the school something it has never paid. I have read 4,000 structures, Ascaro. Yours is the only one that ever frightened me, and it frightens me now, because I can see exactly where it is going to break, and it is going to break in the direction of letting her live. The reader left the lattice within the shift and made, the next day, a full and formal report to Prefect Uvith Marn, not the report Ascaro had asked for, the one that would have proven him mad, but the other one, the true one, the one that put the word unreadable into the Concordance's record beside the name of a grade 16 adolescent, and set the whole slow machinery of oversight turning toward the lattice like a face turning toward a sound in the dark. Sethan Vale did the same thing, and the same thing was to tell the truth to the authority, and the authority heard unreadable and passed the point on the curve, and did with it exactly what a people who had spent 10,000 years being the hand upon the becoming would always do with a becoming they could not read. It reached for the fire, and Ascaro Vihen, who had asked to be proven wrong precisely because some part of him already knew he was right, stood at the clear wall after the reader had gone and looked at the girl who had let herself be read and given away nothing, and understood that he had just, with his own private band and his own trusted reader, started the clock that would end with 9 pale ships over a bright planet. That in trying to check his own madness, he had handed the prefect the one word, unreadable. That turned a delicate commission into a containment, and that Wren, behind the wall, had watched him do it, and had known exactly what it would cost, and had let herself be read anyway. You called someone, she said, when he had them bring her out. It was not a question, a better set of eyes. To tell you if you were seeing things. The flat gray gaze moved over him, sorting, filing. And they told you weren't, and then they went and told the ones above you, because that's what your careful people do. They run the truth up the ladder to the hand at the top, and the hand at the top only knows how to do one thing with a truth it can't hold. She turned the healed hand over, the old habit, looking at the work he had done on it. You just moved up my leaving, Ascaro. By days, maybe. That's fine. I was ready anyway, but I want you to notice what you did, because it's the whole shape of your people in one move. She looked up at him. You met a thing you couldn't read, and instead of asking it what it was, you asked a better reader, and then you told the fleet. Not once did any of you ask me. You've had me in 9 rooms, and you've never once asked me a single question you didn't already have an instrument for. A pause, even and cold and not unkind. I'd have told you. That's the part that'll sit in your shoe the longest. I was right here the whole time, and I'd have told you everything, and none of you ever thought to ask the storm what the weather was going to do. Prefect Uvith Marn came to the lattice on the 9th day, and the prefect did not come to inspect a specimen. The prefect came to close a wound before it bled into the Concordance. Marn was V-Hale to the marrow, older even than Ascaro, an administrator of the shaping arts who had not laid a hand on a living structure in a century, and had risen instead through the quiet work of deciding which of the arts the client worlds were permitted to know about. The prefect wore the pale of the school and the additional gray band of oversight, and moved through the ward with 2 hands folded and 2 clasped behind, and looked at the dead patches in Oscoro's instrument logs, the places where the scales had stopped reporting, the way a magistrate looks at a confession left carelessly on a desk. "You will explain these gaps," Marn said. "The subject exceeded the instruments," Oscoro said. "Instruments do not have a maximum, physician. Only a range we have not yet had cause to extend. You are telling me a grade 16 adolescent produced structural values outside the range the concordance has needed in 10,000 years of practice." The prefect turned. "I'm going to tell you what I have already told the war marshal, who is presently in your upper ward composing a message to his people that I would very much like him not to send. I told him that Oscoro Vihen has the human question in hand. I told the concordance the same. I told 9 client worlds that the fear had a Vihale answer and the answer had a date. The date is tomorrow. Tomorrow the war marshal witnesses the corrected human obey a command he chooses, in words she has never heard, and carries the proof home to a galaxy that is one bad rumor away from doing something permanent about the deathworlds while they are still few and still catchable." The old administrator's gaze did not waver. "You will produce that obedience tomorrow. Or I will produce a different truth for the concordance, that Oscoro Vihen overreached, that the subject failed and was terminated, that the method holds and only the man broke. One of those 2 truths leaves this ward tomorrow, physician. You may choose which. You may not choose neither." Oscoro looked at the prefect for a long moment. Then he said the thing that ended his career quietly in the bright ward, because he was 200 years old and had spent his whole life telling the truth about structures, and found at the last that he could not stop. "She will not obey a command," he said. "Not tomorrow, not ever. There is no seat left to command her by. I laid 3 of them below the routing and she took them into herself the way a body takes food. Prefect, I did not fail to leash her. I taught her to make leashes. You want me to stand her in front of the war marshal and prove she can be owned. And if I do that, the only thing the war marshal will witness is a Vihale physician giving an order to a human being who has learned everything we know, and being refused in front of the buyer, with the whole method in the room. That is the demonstration you are asking for. That is the only one available." The prefect was quiet for a moment. When Marn spoke again, the administrator's voice had gone very soft and very cold, and it was the softness of a physician who has stopped seeing a colleague and begun seeing a lesion. "Then we will not demonstrate obedience," Marn said. "We will demonstrate correction. You will not command her, physician. You will command the room around her. Tomorrow the war marshal will watch you place the youngest of the other subjects, the small one, the one who has stopped speaking, in danger she can see, and you will offer your storm a choice. Save the child by doing what you say, or refuse and watch the child pay for the refusal. A leash need not be on the neck, Oscoro. It need only be on something the animal loves. Your deathworld girl weighs the room. Very well. Put the child on the scale and let us see what she is willing to spend." Oscoro Vihen had corrected the violent and healed the sick, and once, long ago, put down his own sword because his people had taught him that there was a better way to move a living thing than force. He stood in the bright ward and listened to the oldest administrator of that better way explain how to use a mute 11-year-old as a fulcrum against a girl, and he understood that the Vihale had not, after all, put down the sword. They had only made it very small and very quiet, and learned to call it medicine. "No," he said. "You do not get a no," said the prefect. "You spent your no when you cut into a grade 16 child on a promise. Tomorrow, physician, the war marshal, the child, and the choice. Produce the proof or become it." They came for Neela in the gray light of the next shift, and Ren Halloway did not stop them. This was the thing Issei Serral would carry the longest, not the demonstration itself, but the moment before it, the moment the guards came into the holding cell and took the small, silent girl by the arm, and Ren, who could have unmade every one of them where they stood, who had by then read the station down to the last breath and could have brought the docking spurs into her hand like a tool, sat against the wall with her knees drawn up and let them take the child. 8 made a sound. Bram came half up off the floor and Ren put one hand flat on his chest, not hard, and he sat back down, because in the days of the gray room the oldest had become the one whose stillness the others trusted more than their own fear. Not yet, Ren said quietly to the boy, to all of them in the flat, even voice. They think they're building the trap. Let them finish it. A trap you helped build is a door. She watched the guards carry Neela out into the corridor she had memorized, toward the upper ward she had memorized, and her face did not change, and only 8, who had learned to read her the way she had taught him to read the room, saw the one thing that moved in it, a small tightening at the corner of the eye, the flat gray gaze going for half a breath to something very far away and very cold, and understood that the stillness was not calm. The stillness was cost. The oldest had priced the child's fear and was choosing to pay it now, in full, so that she would never have to pay it again. They brought Ren to the upper ward under guard, and the upper ward was flooded with the true noon the Menders loved, the whole bright planet hanging in the dome above a room built like an amphitheater of light. War Marshal Vosk stood at the rail, arms folded, scarred and unreadable. Prefect Marn stood apart in the pale and gray of oversight. Is stood at the instrument wall where Oscaro had put her because he could not bear to have her anywhere he could not see. And at the center of the bright floor, on a raised frame the Menders used for delicate work, they had fixed Neela, not hurt, not yet, only held, a small figure in gray with her ear no longer pressed to any floor, her eyes wide and dry, looking for the one face in the room she trusted. She found it. Ren stood at the edge of the bright floor between 2 guards and looked at the child on the frame, and the child looked back, and something passed between them that no instrument in the ward could read. Oscaro stepped onto the floor. He did not want to. The whole of him did not want to. But the prefect's cold, soft truth was in the room, and the war marshal's judgment was in the room, and 11 billion frightened deathworlders were in the room, whether anyone named them or not. And Oscaro Vihen, who had told a galaxy the storm could be owned, walked out into the noon to prove it or be proven, and lifted all 4 hands in the gesture that opened a correction, and spoke to the girl in the command cadence he had seeded into a dozen client traces over 200 years. Ren Halloway, he said, and the cadence was in it, the old shaping weight, the sound that had made the Sec veteran kneel. You will place your hands on the frame beside the child. You will take up the instrument there, and you will do to her the small thing I ask, which will not scar and will not last, and which will prove to this room that the deathworld answers to the Vihale hand. Refuse, and the frame does the thing itself to her at my word and slower. The choice is yours. That is the mercy in it. I am letting you choose. The bright ward was silent. War Marshal Vosk leaned forward at the rail. Prefect Marn's folded hands did not move. And Ren Halloway, 17 years old, thin, dirt still faint in the creases of her knuckles from a world 9 jumps away that had never stopped trying to kill her, looked at the greatest physician of the age across the noon-flooded floor, and answered him in the flat, even voice that had never once risen, in any of 9 rooms, at anything. No, she said. And then, before the frame could move, before Oscaro could speak the word that would turn it on the child, before the war marshal could straighten or the prefect unfold a single hand, she added the second word, the one that was not for Oscaro at all, the one she had spent 9 days teaching a mute child to be ready to hear. Neela, Ren said. Now. Neela moved first, because that was the plan, and the plan had never once been a weapon. The mute girl on the frame did the smallest thing. She pressed her small bare foot flat against the metal of the frame, soul to steel, the way Ren had taught her to press her hand to the floor of the gray room, feel where the water goes. Water always knows the way out. And she found, through the sole of her foot, the pulse of the great bright station running under her, and she did not command it because she was 11 and could not, but she listened to it wholly, the way Wren had shown her, and in listening she went perfectly, absolutely still. Every instrument in the ward that had been watching the child for stress found stress vanish. The subject on the frame had stopped being afraid. And an 11-year-old ceasing, in one breath, to be afraid in a room built to run on fear, was a reading so far outside anything the Menders had ever logged that, for one held breath, the whole upper ward of the lattice paused to look at the wrong child. Which was the point. Wren had built the trap the way they built theirs, around the thing they were sure they understood. In the breath the room spent looking at Neela, Wren Holloway moved once. She did not run, she did not lunge. Ise, watching from the instrument wall with all four hands gone still, would say at the inquiry that she was not sure afterward that she had seen the girl move at all, only that Wren had been standing at the edge of the noon-flooded floor between two guards, and then the two guards were sitting down, carefully, the way a body sits when the strings that hold it upright are simply no longer being held, and Wren was standing 3 paces nearer the frame with one hand already flat against the raised metal. And the whole thing had cost her, as far as any instrument could measure, nothing at all. There was no violence in it that the eye could catch. There was only the deathworld economy the VHAL had spent 10,000 years forgetting. The knowledge, bred into a girl by a planet that charged for every motion, of exactly which single move ends a thing, and the refusal to spend a second one. The two guards were not dead. That mattered, and Wren had priced it, and Ise recorded it precisely because she understood even in the moment that it was the whole of the story. The girl who could have unmade the room chose, at the exact edge of the art, to switch the guards off rather than break them, the way you close a hand rather than crush what's in it. Mercy was not softness in her. Mercy was precision. She had learned the cost of everything, and she had learned that the ones who spend more than a thing requires are the ones the deathworld kills first. Then she put her hand flat against the frame, palm to steel, the way the child had, the way she had taught the child, and she did the thing that no one in the bright ward, not the prefect, not the war marshal, not Oscuro Vihen himself, had understood was possible until it was already done. She spoke to the station. Not in words. The lattice did not run on words. It ran on the shaping art, on the seated authority of menders whose structures the station recognized and answered. A whole vast body built to obey a VHAL hand the way a corrected client trace obeyed one. And Wren Holloway had spent 9 rooms learning to be a VHAL hand from the inside, had felt Oscuro lay a seat in her and had built one back, had taken the whole art into herself where there was no seam to keep it out. And now she laid her palm against the station's steel and let it read her. And the station, which had been built by physicians to know a mender's authority when it touched one, read the authority in the girl and did not know, because it had no way to know, that the authority was not VHAL. The frame let the child go, not because anyone released it, because the station, reading the seated will pressed against it, obeyed the will, the way it had obeyed VHAL wills for 10,000 years. Neela stepped down off the opened frame into the noon light, unhurt, and walked to Wren's side, and pressed one small hand flat to the back of Wren's hand where it lay against the steel, and added her own quiet listening to it. And the reading the two of them made together ran out through the station's steel like water, finding every crack in a wall the physicians had never thought to build. Overhead, in the great dome, the true noon of the bright planet poured down on a room that had gone entirely silent. War Marshal Vosk had not moved from the rail. He had watched 2 guards switched off and a frame opened, and a mute human child walk unharmed out of a VHAL trap, and he had understood every part of it faster than the physicians, because he was a soldier and had spent his life reading the moment a fight ends before the losers know it has begun. He looked down at the 2 human girls standing hand to hand at the center of the noon-flooded floor, 117 and 111, and he did the thing that told Ise, more than anything else in that terrible bright hour, exactly how the galaxy was going to have to learn to live from that day forward. The War Marshal of the Sec unfolded his scarred arms and stepped back from the rail and lowered his heavy head, not in defeat, because no blow had fallen on him, and not in fear, because the warcasts had trained fear out of themselves 100 generations back. He lowered his head the way one predator lowers its head to another that has just shown at the edge without spending it. Recognition. The oldest courtesy his people had, older than the sword the V-Hail had made them put down and pick back up and put down again. He had come across 9 systems to see whether the physicians could leash a storm, and he had his answer. And the answer had opened a trap with the flat of its hand, and let a child go free rather than kill 2 guards it could have killed. And Vosk of the Sec looked at that and knew, in the marrow the V-Hail had reshaped and never quite owned, that he was not looking at a thing to be leashed. He was looking at the next thing the galaxy would have to reckon with, and he was, for the first time in a long soldier's life, glad it had chosen mercy while it was still learning its own strength. "Physician," Vosk said into the silence without lifting his lowered head, "I withdraw the commission." A pause, the jawplates moved. "And I will tell you once, because you were honest with me and few of your kind are, whatever you thought you were building in here, you were wrong. You did not build a leash. You did not even build a soldier." He raised his head at last and looked, not at Oscaro, but at the 2 girls in the noon. "You were the ground a thing grew out of, nothing more. Be grateful it grew kind." And he turned and walked out of the bright ward, and no one stopped him, because the only will in the room capable of stopping a Sec War Marshal had already decided he could go. Prefect Yuvith Marn did not lower the administrator's head. The oldest physician in the ward looked down at the ruin of the demonstration, the opened frame, the switched-off guards, the War Marshal walking out with the commission withdrawn, and the whole careful reassurance of 9 client worlds walking out with him. And the prefect did the thing that administrators do when the world stops matching the record, which is to reach for the one instrument that has never failed the concordance in 10,000 years. "Purge the ward," Marn said to the station, in the seated command cadence of oversight, the deepest authority the V-Hail had. "All subjects, full terminus." Now, it was the cadence that had ended 100 failed corrections over the prefect's long century, the word that the lattice had always obeyed, the last mercy and the last cruelty of a people who could not bear a becoming they had not authored. The station heard the prefect's seated will and began to answer it, the way it had answered that will for 100 years. And Wren Halloway, palm still flat against the steel, turned her head and looked at the prefect, and the station stopped. Not slowed, stopped. The terminus that Marn had spoken hung half-formed in the great body of the lattice and did not complete, because there were now 2 seated authorities pressed against the station's steel, the prefects and the girls, and the station, built by physicians to obey a mender's hand, could not tell that one of the hands was not V-Hail, could only read 2 wills of equal weight, one commanding terminus and one commanding stillness, and did the only thing a well-made body does when 2 hands pull it opposite ways. It held still, and waited to be told which hand was the true one. "You built it to obey the strongest seated will," Wren said to the prefect in the flat, even voice across the noon. "That's the whole art. That's what your young one keeps saying. You don't force a thing, you seat a will deeper than the one that's already there, and the body follows the deeper seat. I understand it now. I understand all of it." Her palm did not move on the steel. "You just tried to kill 4 children with it, in front of the buyer, to protect a record." She was not angry. Issei, watching, would swear to that at the inquiry until they stopped asking her, that there was no anger anywhere in the girl, not then, not at the end, that the temperature of her never once rose. "So now we find out whose will your station thinks is deeper, mine or yours." A pause, even and unhurried, the pause of someone who has already done the arithmetic and is only waiting for the room to catch up. "I already know the answer, Prefect. I've known it since the 4th room. I'm giving you the space to know it too before I have to show you. That's the only mercy I've got the time to spend. And Yuvith Marn, oldest administrator of the shaping arts, who had decided for a century which truths the galaxy was permitted to survive knowing, pressed the seated authority of the whole Vihale concordance against the steel of the lattice with everything 100 years had made, and the station weighed the prefect's will against the will of a 17-year-old from a grade 16 world and chose. The terminus did not complete. The great body of the lattice, 10,000 years of physics, the finest instrument the galaxy had ever built to obey the deepest seated hand, went quiet under the prefect's authority and answered the girls, and every light in the bright ward that had begun to turn toward killing turned, instead, gently back to noon. The prefect's folded hands opened at last, all four of them, and hung in the borrowed daylight empty. Oscuro Vihen stood alone on the noon-flooded floor with his life's work opened around him like a body on a table, and he found that he was not afraid. He had expected to be afraid. He had lain awake through the sleep shift imagining this hour, the hour the storm turned, and in every version of it fear had been the first thing to arrive. It did not arrive. What arrived instead, standing in the true light of the bright planet with a 17-year-old's palm flat against the steel of the station that no longer answered him, was the one feeling he had spent 9 years refusing to name, and it came in clean and total, the way the light came through the dome. Wonder. I want to ask you something, he said, and I want the truth, because I have spent my whole life buying lies with the word healing, and I would like once before the end of me to hear a true thing said plainly. When you closed the seam, when you took the third seat into yourself, and there was no gap left to lay a hand in, did you decide to do that? Or did it simply happen the way a wound closes? Ren considered the question with the flat seriousness she gave to everything. Both, she said. You cut the door open, I walked through it. I didn't know what was on the other side until I was standing in it. She looked at him without cruelty, which he had come to understand was simply the way she looked at everything, the deathworld economy that did not spend cruelty any more than it spent a second motion. You keep asking me what I did. I keep telling you. I didn't do anything you didn't teach me. You wanted to build a better human. You just didn't understand what the word better was going to cost you because you've spent 10,000 years thinking better meant easier to hold. A pause. It doesn't. It never did. That's the part your whole people got wrong, and it's the part you're going to have to live with because I'm not going to make you forget it, the way you made the others forget. Oscuro closed his four hands slowly. Say the part I got wrong, out loud. I have earned the hearing of it. You think you improved me, she said it flatly, a physician reading a chart. You didn't. You can't improve a human, Oscuro. There's nothing to add. Everything you put in me was already in the shape of us, the reading, the routing, the closing of the seam, all of it. It was already what we were going to be. You didn't build it. You just got impatient and reached in and pulled it out early, in one in me, because you needed a demonstration by a date. For the first time, something moved under the flat gray gaze, and it was not anger and it was not pride. It was something older and colder and far more frightening than either, the calm of a thing that has seen exactly how large it is and has decided, deliberately, not to be frightened of itself. There are 11 billion of us. We were always going to close the seam. Every world you graded 16 and 18 was already teaching us, one dead child at a time, the same thing you taught me in 9 rooms, that the ones who survive are the ones who become all one thing, who stop keeping a gap between what they are and what they do, because the gap is where the planet gets in, and the planet kills what it gets into. She took her hand off the steel at last, and the station stayed hers anyway, and she let it, the way you let a dog stay at heel without a hand on the collar. You didn't make humanity's future, you just met it early. You reached into the weather of a world to prove you could own it, and you pulled out the shape of what the whole weather is turning into, and now you have to go home and tell your people what's coming, and they're not going to believe you, and that's the mercy in it. That's the only mercy I have time to give your whole species. You'll have seen it, and no one will believe you saw it, and you'll get to spend the rest of your 200 years being the physician who told the truth and was called mad. She almost smiled. "I'd have made you forget if I were cruel. I'm not cruel. I'm just done." And Oscaro V. Hen, greatest of the menders, understood at last in the true noon that the war marshal had said it plainest of all of them. He had not built a leash or a soldier or even a better human. He had been the ground a thing grew out of. And the thing had grown kind, had switched off guards rather than break them, had opened a frame rather than kill a child, had told an old man the truth rather than take his mind. And the kindness was the most terrifying part, because a cruel future the V-Hale would have known how to fight. A kind one that could not be owned, could not be seated, could not be healed because it had stopped being sick. A kind one they had no art for at all. "What are you going to do?" he asked very quietly. "I'm going to take the children home," Wren said. "All of them, the 4 in the gray room and the 36 you already cut. Yes, them too." She had read his face, the small involuntary thing that moved in it. "You think the corrected ones are gone, broken, seated too deep to bring back. You built them that way on purpose so no one could ever undo your work." She turned toward the corridor she had memorized, toward the lower wards where the demonstration lot stood and knelt and wept at night to no one. "You forgot to plan for the one thing your whole art can't survive meeting, Oscaro. Someone who learned to seat a will and decided to use it to give people back their own." The order came from the concordance a quarter shift later, and it did not come to Oscaro, because Oscaro no longer commanded anything the concordance recognized. It came to Prefect Yuvithmarn, on the private oversight channel, in the flat administrative cadence that had ended worlds more quietly than any war, and Issa Serral heard it because she had stopped, somewhere in the last terrible hour, being an apprentice who did what she was told, and had started being a 91-year-old physician who listened at doors. "Containment fleet dispatched. The lattice is designated a compromised site. All structures and all subjects aboard are to be resolved. Terminus by external means, station-wide, no exceptions, no record. Arrival in 1/3 of a shift. The concordance regrets the loss of Physician V. Hen's work and will remember him kindly. Ensure nothing survives to be studied. Ensure, above all, that nothing survives to be freed." They were going to burn the station. The whole bright lattice, 10,000 years of physic, 40 subjects and the crews and the prefect and Oscaro and the girl and the 4 children in the gray room, all of it, from outside, quickly, because the concordance had understood faster than anyone on the station what Wren was, had understood it from the dead patches in the instrument logs, and had decided, with the calm of a people who had never once met a problem they could not correct, that the only correction left for a becoming they could not seat was to make certain it had never happened. Issei found Wren in the lower ward, among the corrected. The demonstration lot stood in the gray light in the postures the menders had seated into them. 40 humans who had come off a transport from Keswick Reach as farmers and hunters and a school teacher, and 3 children too old for the gray room and too young for the frame, and had come out of Oscaro's cradles as finished pieces, obedient, functional, wills bent to a hand that had gone quiet and left them standing there in the dim like tools returned to a rack. The SEC veteran was not among them. He was the demonstration's demonstration, 3 levels up. But these 40 were, and Issei had watched them be made, and had called the discomfort squeamishness, and could not call it that any more, because Wren Halloway was moving down the line of them, and Issei was watching the discomfort's true name walk on 2 thin legs and undo, one human at a time, everything the menders had ever been proud of. She did it the way she did everything, once per person precisely, at no cost the instruments could find. She stood in front of a corrected woman, a school teacher, the record said, 31 years, seated on the 4th day, and she pressed one palm flat to the woman's sternum, the way she pressed her palm to steel, and she reached into the structure with the art Oscaro had taught her from the inside of 9 rooms, and she found the seat, the small bright node of imposed authority sitting at the confluence of the woman's will and action, the gate that answered to a hand that was not hers. And she took it out. Not the way Oscuro would have. Oscuro would have argued that it could not be done, that a seated will was a rewritten thing, that you could not unbend what had been bent without breaking it. He would have been right for a V-hail. But Ren had not learned the art as a V-hail learns it from above, from the physician's side of the table. She had learned it from inside the correction, as the thing being corrected, and she knew the seat the way only the seated could know it, knew it the way you know the exact shape of a stone that has been in your shoe for 9 rooms, and she reached in, and she did not break the woman's will to remove the gate. She gave the woman back the routing. The same 1,000 fine roads Ren's own structure had grown around every seat, the roads that made a seat pointless, the roads that were, Ren had understood in the 4th room, simply what a human structure does when it is allowed to become all one thing. She showed the woman's structure how to grow them. She did not unseat the schoolteacher. She taught the schoolteacher to close her own seam, and let the closing swallow the gate the way her own closing had swallowed the 3rd seat, food to a body, and the woman drew one long breath and came back into her own eyes the way Neela had come back off the frame, and looked at her own 2 hands, and began, silently, to weep. Not the seated night weeping the instruments logged, but the other kind, the kind that means a person has just discovered they are still in there. "How long?" Issa said from the doorway, and her voice did not sound like her own. "How long does each one take?" Ren did not turn around. "Longer than switching off a guard," she said. "Shorter than the concordance thinks I have." She moved to the next in the line, a young man, a hunter, seated on the 5th day. "You heard the order." "Yes." 1/3 of a shift, 40 of them plus the 4 in the gray room plus getting everyone to a ship and clear of the station before your people burn it. She pressed her palm flat to the hunter's chest. "That's the arithmetic. I've been doing it since you walked in. It doesn't close." She said it without weight, without fear, the way she'd remarked on the color of a ceiling. "I can free them or I can save them. In the time your people have given me, I can't do both." And Issei Serral, 91 years old, apprenticed to the greatest physician of the age, raised in the 6 words older than the sword, stood in the gray light of the lower ward, and made the choice that would strike her from the school and end the only life she had ever wanted and put her name forever on the wrong side of the concordance's record, and made it the way Ren made everything, once precisely, at a cost she had already priced. "Then you free them," she said, "and I'll fly the ship." There was one more, and Ren went up for him alone. The Sec veteran was not in the lower ward with the human demonstration lot. He was the demonstration's finest piece, and the menders had kept him on the upper level near the amphitheater, in a clean, bright holding chamber where the War Marshal's people could inspect him, and he had stood there through the whole of the day, through Vosk's withdrawal, through the opened frame, through the fleet's arrival on the bands, because no one had told him to do anything else, and a seated will does not act unbidden. He stood in the borrowed noon exactly where they had left him, an old soldier of a tamed people, waiting for a hand that was never coming back to tell him what he was. Issa tried to stop her. "There is no time. The fleet is a 1/6 of a shift out. The transport is loading. You have 44 already, and every one of them is a life you have to fly clear of a terminus, and you want to go up 3 levels, past whatever security the station has left. For 1 sec you cannot even carry." His people withdrew, Ren. "The War Marshal left him here." "That's why I'm going up," Ren said, and did not slow. "His people left him. That's the whole reason." She was already at the lift the menders used, the one she had memorized in the 4th room and never once been allowed to touch, and it opened for her because nothing on the station held that she did not permit to hold her, and Issei, 91 and honest, understood that the girl had not asked her a question and was not going to, and that the thing she was watching was not recklessness. It was the ledger. Ren had priced the veteran, the way she priced everything, and had decided that a becoming which left one seated soldier standing in a bright room, because his people were done with him, was not a becoming worth carrying home, and that the arithmetic of 44 plus 1 was worse than the arithmetic of 44, only in a way that did not matter next to the thing it would cost her to leave him. The upper level had 3 of the station's remaining security, pale Mender's proctors, unarmed the way the V-Hale were always unarmed, carrying instead the quiet authority that had held 10,000 years of subjects still. And they moved to still her the way they had stilled everything, reaching for a seated will to press against, and found none, because there was no seam in her to press. And by the time they understood that a thing was walking through their authority that their authority could not touch, she was past them. And they were sitting down carefully, the way the guards on the amphitheater floor had sat down, switched off and not broken, at no cost the instruments could find. She did not spend a second motion on them. She had somewhere to be. The Sec veteran watched her come into the bright chamber and did not move, because no one had told him to move. Ren stopped in front of him. He was enormous, scarred, green-scaled, a killer of 100 fields refined into obedience by the very people now leaving him to burn, and he looked down at the thin human girl with the flat, empty eyes of a will that had been bent so deep it had forgotten it was ever straight, and Ren looked up at him with the flat gray eyes of a will that had closed the seam, and for a moment the two of them stood in the noon, the tamed and the untamable, the leash the V-Hale had perfected, and the leash they never could. "They left you," Ren said, not gently. The plain, flat truth, because she had learned that gentleness offered too soon reads as pity, and a soldier does not want pity, and this one had had 10,000 years of his people's pride bred into the marrow the Menders had never quite owned. "Your war marshal came, and he saw what I am, and he withdrew, and he flew home to warn the warcasts, and he left you standing in this room because you are seated, and a seated thing is baggage. That's what the leash makes you. Baggage they leave behind." She lifted one thin hand. "I'm going to take it off. It's going to hurt because it's deep, and I'm not going to make it not hurt because the hurt is you coming back. You've been gone a long time. This is the part where you decide whether you want to come back to it." A pause, even and cold. "You don't have to. Some don't. It's allowed. But I'm not leaving you standing in a room to burn because your people were done with you. That's not a thing I'm willing to fly home carrying. So, do you want your own hands back, soldier? It's a yes or it's a no. I've got a sixth of a shift and I'm spending some of it on you either way." The Sec veteran looked at her for a long moment. And then, slowly, from somewhere under the seating, from the marrow the V-Hale had reshaped for 100 generations and never fully taken, a single word came up in the old warcast cadence, rusty and enormous and terribly quiet. The first word he had said unbidden in longer than he could have counted. "Oh, yes." She put her palm flat against his scaled chest, over the place where, in a sec, the seam ran, and she reached into the deepest correction the school had ever seeded into one of his people, 3 generations deep, and she did not break it. She did what she had done for the school teacher and the hunter and the well driller, except that it took longer, because the V-Hale had had 100 generations of practice at seating the sec, and no one had ever once tried to unseat one, and she had to find, under 3 generations of imposed obedience, the straight thing the leash had been bent around, and show it how to grow the roads, and let the growing swallow the gate. He made a sound while she did it that Issei heard 3 levels down through the station's steel, a low grinding note like a mountain remembering it had once been able to move. And when it was done, the veteran drew one long breath into a body that was, for the first time in his life and his father's life and his father's before that, entirely his own, and looked down at his own scarred hands, and closed them, and understood that they had closed because he had chosen it, and no other reason and no other hand. He did not weep. The sect did not weep. That had been bred out with the fear. But he lowered his great scarred head to the thin human girl, the way his war marshal had lowered his head in the amphitheater, the oldest courtesy his people had, and he said, in the warcast cadence that had not been his own to command in 3 generations, "My people made 100 years of soldiers for them, kneeling soldiers, baggage." He raised his head. I'm going to go home and I'm going to find every one of us still standing in a bright room waiting for a hand, and I am going to teach them what you just taught me. The straight thing under the bend, the roads, all of it." His jaw plates moved. "You have made an enemy of the concordance today, human. You have also, I think, made the concordance an enemy it has never had before, its own finest work, turning straight, one leash at a time, across every warcast it ever sold." He straightened to his full towering height, a free sec in a burning station. "Point me at the ship. I can carry 3 of your children under one arm and hold a corridor with the other. And I would very much like, before I go home to unmake 100 years of my people's kneeling, to spend the last sixth of a shift on this station, doing the one thing they seeded out of me and could not, in the end, keep out." "Which thing?" Ren said, already moving. The veteran fell into step beside her, and for the first time in 100 years of his refined and obedient life, the old soldier of the sect smiled, and it was not a kind smile, and it was entirely his own. "Standing," he said, "in the way. The arithmetic that would not close for one girl closed for a pack." That was the thing the concordance had failed to put in its order, because the concordance thought in the only shape it had ever needed: one physician, one subject, one hand, and one thing held. It had dispatched a fleet sized to kill a station and 40 broken tools and a single anomaly, and it had never once considered that the anomaly's whole nature was that it did not stay single. Ren freed the schoolteacher, and the schoolteacher's structure closed its seam and swallowed its gate, and the schoolteacher stood up into her own eyes, and Ren said 4 flat words to her: "Now you free him," and put the woman's freed hand flat on the chest of the seated hunter beside her, and showed her once how the routing grew. The schoolteacher learned it the way Ren had learned the seats, all at once, from the inside. And then there were 2 of them going down the line, and then the hunter came back into his eyes, and there were 3, and then a woman who had been a well-driller on a world graded 18, and then a boy of 14 too old for the gray room, and the line of the corrected did not so much get shorter as catch, the freeing running from the freed to the still seated the way fire runs, hand to chest, breath to breath. Faster with each one, because each freed human was another pair of hands that already knew the whole of it, and the gray ward that had held 40 finished tools filled, in less than a sixth of a shift, with 40 human beings coming back one after another into the astonished ownership of themselves. Issei Searle stood in the doorway and watched the thing the Vihale had no art for, and no word for, and no defense against, multiply itself across a room, and she understood at last what her people had truly been afraid of, under all the client world's talk of human violence. It was not that a human could kill. Everything could kill. It was that a free human could not be held and could make more free humans out of the held ones, faster than any hand could seat them, so that the moment one of them closed the seam the whole species began, quietly, hand to hand, to become unownable together. And there was no fleet large enough to burn a thing that spread at the speed of one person teaching another how to breathe. "How long until the fleet?" Ren said, without looking up from the last of the line. "A sixth of a shift, perhaps less." Issei had the oversight channel in her ear still. "They will not hail. They do not hail a compromised site. They will arrive, and they will resolve it, and there will be no record that any of us were ever here." "Then we need a record," said a voice from the corridor, "and we need a ship, and I can give you one of the 2. Oscaro Vihen stood in the doorway of the gray ward with the true noon at his back, and he was not the man who had opened a correction on the amphitheater floor. Something had gone out of him and something else had come in, and Issei, who had known his face for a decade, could not name either, except that the certainty was gone, the 200-year certainty that had let him tell a galaxy the storm could be owned, and in its place was the one thing a Vihale of his rank was never supposed to end a career possessing, which was doubt worn openly, like a wound left unhealed on purpose, so that everyone could see it had been earned. "You'll give us a ship," Ren said. She did not turn around. She freed the last of the line, an old man who had been a farmer, and set the farmer's hand on no one because there was no one left seated and straightened. Why? Because you were right. Oscuro came into the gray light, every part of it. I have spent 9 days and 9 years being the ground a thing grew out of, and I could not see the thing for looking at my own hands in it. You are not my work. You were never anyone's work. He lifted all 4 hands empty. There is a transport at the 3rd docking spur, a supply hauler, unarmed, slow, and large enough to carry all of you, which the War Marshal's cutter is not and the Oversight cutter is not. It is the only ship on the lattice that can hold this many. I can open the spur. The station no longer answers me, but the docks answer a physician's hand for medical evacuation, and that authority is older than the Oversight cadence, and I placed it there myself, 40 years ago, in case a ward ever had to be emptied faster than the concordance could approve. They never revoked it. They forgot I had it. Something moved at the corner of his old mouth that was not quite a smile. I have spent 40 years being forgotten by my own institution. It is, at last, useful. And the record, Ren said. The record is why I am not coming with you. Issei turned sharply. Oscuro did not look at her. He kept his eyes on the girl, because the girl was the one who understood cost, and he wanted the thing said to the one who would price it correctly. The concordance's order is no record, Oscuro said. They will burn the station so that nothing survives to be studied and, above all, nothing survives to be freed. If the transport clears and vanishes into human space, they will call it a station lost to an accident of physics, and the client worlds will sleep, and in a year there will be nothing but a dead patch in an instrument log to say that the human question was ever answered here. Unless someone stays. Unless the containment fleet arrives to find not a compromised site to resolve quietly, but a physician of the school standing in the true noon of the upper ward, on an open channel, telling them exactly what walked out of here and why, making them look at it, making them enter it into a record they cannot purge because it was witnessed by one of their own in the open, in real time. His 4 hands folded slowly in the gesture that closed a correction. They will burn the station anyway. They will burn me with it, but they will not be able to burn the fact that Oscuro Vihen said on the day the future came that it came kind, and that the Vihale answer to it was fire. That is the record. Someone has to be standing in the noon to make it, or it does not exist. The gray ward was silent. 40 freed humans and 4 children and a 91-year-old apprentice looked at the oldest physician among them, and Ren Halloway weighed him the way she had weighed the War Marshal, the flat gray assessment sorting a thing into a category. And, for the first time since the first room, Issei watched the girl find a thing she had not already priced. That's not mercy, Ren said finally. That's a debt. You think you owe it. I do owe it. You don't owe it to me. No, Oscuro agreed. I owe it to the 4 in the gray room and the 40 you just gave back their own hands, and the 11 billion coming behind them who are going to spend the next 1,000 years being feared for the crime of becoming what they always were. I cannot stop the fear, but I can put one true sentence into the record where the fear lives, and let it sit there like a stone in the concordance's shoe for as long as the concordance lasts. The corner of his mouth moved again. You taught me that. The stone in the shoe. I have been the physician who removed every stone from every shoe in the galaxy for 200 years. I would like, at the end, to be the one who left one in. And Ren Halloway, who did not grandstand, who did not weep, who had not once let the temperature of herself rise in 9 rooms or on any floor, did the only thing she ever did that Issei could not fit into the flat cold ledger of her. She crossed the gray ward, and she stood in front of the man who had cut into her 9 times to prove she could be owned, and she put one thin scarred hand flat against his chest, over the place where in a human the seam would be. You don't have one to close, she said quietly. You're not seated, you never were, you did the seating. A pause. But I can feel where it hurts. That's new. That's since the 9th room. Her hand pressed once, the way it pressed steel, the way it pressed the chests of the freed. I'm not going to fix it. You wouldn't keep it if I did, and you should keep it. It's the truest thing in you. She stepped back. Open the spur, Oscuro, and when they come, make them look. The transport was a slab-sided supply hauler with a cavernous hold that had carried grafting stock and medical consumables. And once, a shipment of the very cradles Oscuro had built Cradle 9 from, and it smelled of cold metal and antiseptic, and the particular staleness of a hold that had never carried anything that breathed. Ys ran the flight cage from muscle memory 90 years old and rusted, and found it came back, the way the deathworld came back to Ren's hands, because some things a body learns and does not unlearn. They loaded fast, because the pack loaded itself. Ren gave no orders past the first ones. She had spent 9 days teaching 4 children to read a room and a sixth of a shift teaching 40 adults to close their own seams. And the thing about people who have just been handed back their own hands is that they do not stand and wait to be told what to do with them. The schoolteacher took the children. The hunter and the well driller took the loading. The old farmer, who had been a farmer, found the ration stores by smell and had them moving before anyone thought to look for them. 44 humans who had come off a transport as cargo boarded the hauler as a crew, and the only thing any of them needed from Ren was the occasional flat word that told them the shape of the next problem, and even that they needed less with every passing minute, because the reading was spreading through them, the way it had spread through the children, hand to hand. And a pack that can all read the room does not need a leader so much as it needs a first heartbeat to fall into step with. The fleet came up over the bright planet's limb with a sixth of a shift to spare, and did not hail. There were 9 ships in the containment fleet, and they were beautiful because the V-hail made everything beautiful, even the tools they used to unmake what they could not correct. They were pale and smooth and unhurried sterilization craft with no gun ports, because the V-hail did not shoot the things they resolved. They were physicians to the last, and a physician did not shoot. A physician treated, and the treatment they carried in their smooth, pale hulls was quieter and more total than any gun, a way of reaching into a station-sized structure and stopping it, the way Marn had tried to stop the ward, everything at once, no record, no exception. 100 years of the deepest correction in the school turned outward on a whole compromised site. They came up over the bright planet's limb in formation and did not hail, and began, without ceremony, the slow settling into range from which a fleet of the V-hail resolved a thing forever. In the upper ward in the true noon, Oscuro Vihen opened every channel the lattice had. Not the oversight channel, all of them. The medical bands and the docking bands and the school's own scholarly array that reached, in a slow 10,000-year murmur, to every client world and concordance node, and listening post the physicians had ever planted, the whole quiet nervous system of a people who had spent an age being the ones everyone called when a thing went wrong. He opened it all, and he stood in the borrowed daylight of the bright planet with his 4 hands folded in the gesture that closed a correction. And he began, in the flat clear cadence of a physician reading a chart to the record, to tell the truth. This is physician-sculptor Oscuro Vihen of the School of the Menders from the station lattice on the open bands, unencrypted to any who can hear. I am recording the following against the order of the concordance, which has designated this site for terminus with no record. There will be a record. I am making it now. 9 days ago I completed the deepest correction ever attempted on a human subject, a grade 16 adolescent named Ren Halloway, in order to prove to a frightened galaxy that the deathworld could be owned. I failed. I did not fail because the human was too strong. I failed because I was wrong about what a human is. There is no seat that will hold in them. There is no seam to lay a hand in. Every improvement we make in them, they take and keep and grow past, because becoming more than we are is not a thing that was done to them in my ward. It is the thing they already were, arriving early in one girl, because I was impatient and reached in and pulled the future out ahead of its hour. I am telling you this because in a short time 9 ships of our own school are going to resolve this station, and 44 human beings and me, so that none of you ever have to know what I have just told you. And I am telling you that it will not work. The girl freed 40 seated humans in a sixth of a shift, and each one she freed could free the next, and there is no fleet in the settled galaxy large enough to burn a thing that spreads at the speed of one person teaching another how to breathe. You are afraid of human violence. You should be afraid of human freedom, which is the one condition our whole art has no treatment for, and which is coming, whether you burn this station or not, because it was never in the station. It was always in them. I only opened the door early. The concordance will tell you I was mad. Remember that they told you first that I had the human question in hand. I did not. No one does. No one is going to. That is the record. Enter it. He stopped. In the great dome above him, the 9 pale ships settled into range, unhurried, beautiful, and did not answer, because a fleet on a terminus run did not answer the thing it had come to resolve. But the array had carried his words out into the slow 10,000-year murmur, to every client world and node and listening post, unencrypted on all the bands. And that, Ren had understood before he had, was the move that mattered, the stone that could never be got back out of the shoe. Marn's order had been no record. Oscuro had made the record the one thing the concordance could not purge. Not a log in a station about to burn, but a thing already spoken, already spreading, already in 10,000 ears across the settled galaxy, at the speed of a truth let loose. The V-hail could burn the lattice. They could not burn the sentence. It was already gone, out past the bright planet's limb, riding the physician's own array into every place they had ever taught the galaxy to listen. The transport cleared the third docking spur as the fleet settled, and Issei Serral flew it the way you fly a slab-sided hauler away from 9 ships that have come to unmake you slow, because it could not be anything but slow, straight out along the Terminator into the bright planet's glare, where the fleet's instruments would have to look into the sun to find her. An old trick, a deathworld trick, though Issei had never set foot on a deathworld. She had simply spent the last hour learning from the girl that the ground is always on someone's side, and the only question is whose. They'll see us, Issei said. The moment we clear the planet's light they'll see us, and we are one slow hauler and they are 9, and we cannot outrun a V-hail settling run, and I will not lie to this hold and say we can. We don't outrun them, Ren said. She stood at the flight cage with one thin hand flat against the hull, the way she had stood with her hand flat against the steel of the amphitheater floor, and Issei realized the girl had not taken her hand off the lattice at all, that some part of the reading still reached back across the widening dark to the station she had learned down to its bones, the way you keep a hand on a thing you are not done with. We don't outrun them. We give them a reason not to fire that costs them more than firing. They are V-hail, Ren. They do not count cost the way. They will now. Ren's flat gray gaze was fixed forward into the glare, but her hand pressed the hull once, the way it pressed the chests of the freed, the way it had pressed the old physician's chest over the place where it hurt. Oscuro put the truth on every band in the settled galaxy. 10,000 listening posts heard a physician of their own school say the future came kind, and the V-hail answer was fire. Right now, every one of those posts is watching this system to see whether it was true. She turned her head at last and looked at Issei, and there was the thing behind her eyes again. The small room opened into the larger one, the light of the larger one coming through. So the fleet has a choice. They didn't have a sixth of a shift to go. They can burn one slow hauler full of children on every open band in the galaxy and prove Oscuro right in front of everyone he told, or they can let us go and call him mad, and hope the galaxy believes the madness instead of the mercy. The transport ran out of the planet's glare into the naked dark, and the 9 pale ships turned, all of them, and found the slow hauler in an instant and did not fire. They'll call him mad, Ren said. It's cheaper. I priced it. The 9 ships held. The transport ran for the jump line, slow, straight, naked in the dark, and the fleet that had come to resolve it watched it go, because a fleet that had spent 10,000 years never needing to be afraid had just been handed, by one of its own on every band at once, the single arithmetic it could not solve. There was no way to unmake the hauler that did not confirm, in front of the whole listening galaxy, exactly the thing it had come to erase. Marne's order had been no record. And a physician in the noon and a girl with her hand on a hull had, between them, made the record the only survivor of the day, had made letting them live the sole remaining path to the lie, so that the mercy the fleet showed the transport was not mercy at all but the last move of the cover-up, and the V-Hale took it, because it was cheaper, exactly as she had said. They let the future go, and told themselves they were protecting the record. It was the most human thing the V-Hale had ever done, and not one of them saw it. Behind them, small in the great dark, the War Marshal's cutter had not left after all. It sat off the fleet's flank where a soldier sits when he has withdrawn from a thing, but not yet decided he is finished watching it. And as the transport ran for the jump line, the cutter did one thing once precisely, at a cost Vosk of the Sec had plainly already priced. It lit its drives and slid, slow and deliberate, into the lane between the settling fleet and the fleeing hauler, and sat there, a single refined killer of a people the V-Hale had tamed 100 generations back, blocking the line the terminus would have to travel, saying nothing, threatening nothing, simply being in the way, the oldest courtesy his people had, the one predator giving the other the seconds it needed to clear the ground. He did not fire either. The Sec did not fire on their suppliers. But he sat in the lane until the transport crossed the jump line, and then he pulled his cutter aside and let the fleet have its empty station back, and turned for Sec space without a word, carrying home to the warcasts the one report the Concordance most did not want carried anywhere: that the storm had come, and it had chosen mercy, and a soldier had recognized it and stepped aside and been glad. The transport reached the jump line with the bright planet a coin behind them and the 9 pale ships holding their fire on every band in the galaxy. And Issei Serral, 91 years old, struck from a school she had not yet been told she was struck from, laid in the jump the way she had laid in 100 jumps in a life that felt like someone else's now, and the dark folded, and the lattice and the fleet and the bright unpeopled planet were gone. And the hold of the hauler was full of the sound of 44 human beings breathing free air, for the first time since a transport had taken them off a world named for the way it killed them. No one cheered. That surprised Issei, who had expected if they lived a human noise, the species was famous for its noise. But the hold stayed quiet, and she understood, flying them into the dark toward a border she was no longer sure would have her, that the quiet was the truest thing they had shown her yet. They did not cheer because it was not over. They had priced it, all of them, the way the girl had taught them to price everything in a sixth of a shift of coming back into their own hands. They were free, and being free was not the end of the arithmetic. It was the beginning of a much longer one, and they had a long way to carry it, and cheering was a use of energy, and they had learned exactly how much everything costs. The Sec veteran rode the second jump sitting against the aft bulkhead of the hold, with 2 human children asleep against his scaled flank, and Issei, coming back through the hold to check the ration count, stopped when she saw it and could not for a moment make herself move on. She had watched the V-Hale seat the first of his line 3 centuries back. She had studied the recordings in the school, the way apprentices studied the great corrections, the kneeling soldier held up as proof of what the art could do to even the fiercest of the war castes. And here at the end of everything sat the last soldier of that 100-year work, unseated by a human child's hand, with 2 more human children, the smallest of the 4 from the gray room, and a colony-born infant one of the freed women had been carrying when the survey ships came, sleeping against him as though he were a warm and ordinary thing, because they had read the room the way Wren had taught them to read it. And the room told them the enormous scaled predator was safe now, entirely. In a way no instrument could measure, and no seat could fake. "They should be afraid of you," Issei said quietly. "By everything I was ever taught, a refined Sec, they should not sleep on you." "They read the water," the veteran said, in the warcast cadence that was his own again. The girl taught them. They put a hand on a thing and they feel which way it wants to run. They put a hand on me. He moved one scarred finger gently to keep from waking the child on his arm, and they felt that I no longer want to run any way but home, and that home, for me now, is wherever the ones who unmade my leash are going. So they sleep. His jawplates moved. Your people spent 10,000 years teaching everything to be afraid of the right things and unafraid of the wrong ones. That was the leash under all the leashes, not obedience, fear, correctly aimed. These children are not afraid of me, and they are not afraid of the fleet, and they are not afraid of the dark we are flying through. They are afraid of exactly one thing, and it is the only thing worth being afraid of, and your school never had a treatment for it because it never wanted to cure it. It wanted to sell it. And what is the one thing? Isa said, though she already by then half knew. Being made into a hand for someone else's want. The veteran looked down at the sleeping children. 3 generations of his people's kneeling ended in the closing of one seam. That is the whole of what they fear, and the whole of what they will not become, and the whole of why your concordance is right to be terrified, not because they are strong, though they are, but because they have stopped being usable, and a galaxy your people built entirely out of usable things does not know how to hold a thing that has quietly decided it will never be used again. He settled back against the bulkhead, enormous and gentle and free. I'm going to go home and make my whole war caste unusable. 100 years of your school's finest soldiers, turning straight. And then the sec will be what the humans are, no hand at the top to give the word, no marrow left that answers to one. And your people will look at the 2 fiercest peoples they ever tamed, standing free and refusing to be weapons, and they will finally understand what the girl understood in the 4th room. He closed his freed hand slowly. That the most dangerous thing in the settled galaxy was never the ones who could kill. It was the ones who could not be owned, and who had decided, having felt the leash, to spend the rest of forever taking everyone else's off. Issei counted the rations in the end badly, and went forward to the flight cage, and flew the rest of the jump with a war-cast soldier's words sitting in her the way the girl's words sat in her, and understood that she was carrying home to no home a truth heavier than any her people had ever hoarded. That the age of the usable galaxy was over, and that it had ended not with a weapon but with a mercy, in the hold of a slow hauler, with 2 children asleep on the chest of a thing the Vihale had spent 100 years making sure would never be able to hold them, and had failed. The crossing took 4 jumps and the better part of a standard week, and Issei Serral spent it learning, hour by hour, that she had understood nothing about the species she had helped her people take apart on a table. She had expected the humans to be loud. They were not loud. She had expected them to be grateful, the way the Vihale were owed gratitude by everything they touched, and they were not grateful either, not to her. Not exactly, though a few of the freed adults found their way to the flight cage in the long quiet shifts and stood behind her chair and said, in the plain flat cadence they had all caught from the girl, that they knew what she had given up to fly them, and that they would not forget it, and that a human not forgetting was a heavier thing than a Vihale being thanked. And she should understand the difference. She came to understand the difference. It kept her awake more than the fear of the border did. She had expected the girl to lead, and the girl did not lead. This unsettled Issei more than anything. Ren Holloway had opened a frame with the flat of her hand, and made a station choose her will over a prefect's and freed 40 seated humans and priced a fleet's mercy down to the decimal. And now, in the hold, she did almost nothing at all. She sat with the children. She let the schoolteacher run the schooling of them, because the schoolteacher was better at it, and she let the hunter run the watch, because the hunter was better at it, and she let the old farmer run the stores, and she spent her hours sitting against the cold hull with Neela's head on her shoulder, reading the ship the way she read everything, and saying, when someone brought her a problem, exactly and only as much as the problem needed and not one word more. You could run all of it, Issei said to her in the 4th jump when the 2 of them were alone at the cage. They would follow you into any fire. You know that. You could be whatever the human word is, the one at the front. That's the part your people never understood. Ren did not look up from the dark in the forward port. You think better means out in front. You think the best of a thing is the one you can put a hand on and steer, and the highest of us would be the one everyone else answers to, the seat at the top of all the seats. She turned the healed hand over, looking at it, the old habit. There isn't one. That's what I am, Issei. That's the whole of what you were so afraid of under all of it. I'm not the strongest human. I'm not the one at the front. I'm just the first one who closed the seam. And the thing about closing the seam is that it doesn't make you a queen. It makes you unable to be anyone's tool and unable to make anyone else into yours. She finally looked at the old apprentice. Your people spent 10,000 years being the hand on everything. You met a thing that can't be a hand and can't be held, and you called it a storm, because a storm was the only unownable thing you had a word for. But a storm doesn't have children who read the room. We do. That's the difference. That's the future your Oscuro pulled out early. Not one of us out in front. All of us unownable together and no seat at the top for anyone, yours or ours. A pause. It's going to take you 1,000 years to be able to even see it. It doesn't have a shape your art can read. That's why it's safe. That's why it's coming. Issei flew the rest of that jump in silence, and somewhere in it she stopped being a physician of the V-Hail in her own mind, because a physician of the V-Hail was a hand on a becoming, and she had just been told by the becoming itself, in the flat kind voice that never rose, that the age of the hand was ending, not in fire, not in conquest, but in the quiet arithmetic of a species that had learned, on 11 billion killing grounds, to stop keeping a gap between what it was and what it did, and had begun, one seam at a time, to close. They came into human space at a border the humans called Halden's Cross, which was not a world but a great slow-turning wheel of salvaged hull metal hung at the edge of the deathworld colonies, and the humans of Halden's Cross did the thing the V-Hail fleet had not done, which was hail. They hailed hard, a slow, unarmed hauler out of concordant space squawking a V-Hail medical transponder, and refusing to answer in any of the trade cants was, to the border companies of Halden's Cross, either a trap or a tragedy, and they scrambled a pair of patched-together interceptors crewed by people who had grown up on worlds that graded 16 and worse, and had exactly no reason left to trust anything that came out of the pale, civilized dark. A human voice came over the band, young, hard, unimpressed, a woman's voice with the flat cadence of the colonies in it. Unidentified hauler, this is Halden Control. You are flying a Mender transponder into a human border, and you have not answered a single cant. You have got about a minute to become something other than a problem before we make you one. Talk. And Ren Halloway leaned to the band, and did not identify the ship, and did not explain the transponder, and did not tell them about the station or the fleet or the girl who had closed the seam. She said 7 words, in the flat, even voice, the deathworld cadence answering the deathworld cadence across the dark. Keswick Reach, 44 of us coming home. The band went quiet. On the wheel of Halden's Cross, in a control room full of hard colony faces, someone who had lost kin at Keswick Reach when the concordant survey ships came and took a settlement's worth of people off a grade 16 world and left the houses standing empty. Someone stood up out of a chair very slowly, and the interceptors that had been sliding into a firing spread peeled off and fell into escort instead, one to each flank of the slow hauler, close. The way you fly close to a thing you have decided, all at once, to bring in gently, and the young hard voice came back over the band changed, cracked down the middle, colony flat and shaking under it both at once. Say again the count. 44, Ren said. Alive, all of them, and one V-Hail who flew us out and can't go home. She comes in under my word or we all stay out here. That's the deal. I'm not offering another one. There was a silence, and then the young hard voice said, Bring the Mender. Bring all of them. Halden's Cross has you. And the wheel of salvaged hull metal turned its great slow face toward the incoming hauler and opened, and the humans of the border brought the future in the way they had once been brought into the galaxy themselves, small, dirty, unannounced, and impossible to hold. The Concordance inquiry into the loss of the station lattice convened 40 days later, and it found, as inquiries do, exactly what it had been assembled to find. Oscuro V. Hen was not burned with his station. Wren had priced that too, in the naked dark, in the length of a held breath. The fleet had let the transport go rather than confirm the record on every band, and having chosen the cover-up over the fire, it could not then very well burn the one physician whose living testimony was the cover-up's whole point. A burned witness was a confirmed truth. A living witness could be managed. So they took him off the lattice before they resolved the empty station, and they brought him home to the school he had served for 200 years, and they gave him the mercy the girl had named, the mercy of being believed to be mad. He testified for 3 days. He told them everything, in the flat, clear cadence of a physician reading a chart to a record, the same words he had put on every band over the bright planet, and the inquiry listened to all of it with the grave attention the V-Hail gave to the afflicted, and entered it, and set it gently aside. Physician V. Hen had overreached. Physician V. Hen had, in the strain of an impossible commission, formed a delusional attachment to a failed subject, and constructed around that attachment an elaborate and moving architecture of belief, in which his failure became not error but revelation. It was, the inquiry noted with real sorrow, a not uncommon collapse in menders of great gift who worked too long at the edge of the art. He would be cared for. He would be honored for his years. He would not be permitted to touch a living structure again, for his own sake, and the human question would be reopened for a future generation of steadier hands. Yuvith Marn read the finding into the record. Issa Sarah was named in it once, as a promising apprentice regrettably lost to the same site, presumed resolved, and struck from the school's rolls, which was the school's way of burning a person who was inconveniently still alive. And when it was done, and the inquiry was closing its files, an underclerk of the Concordance, young, 400 years from any decision that mattered, whose only task that day had been to log the disposition of Physician V. Hen's effects, did a small thing once that no one asked her to do and no one ever traced, because she had spent 3 days listening to a broken old physician say, over and over, in a voice with no madness anywhere in it that she could find, "There will be a record, enter it." And something in the 6 words older than the sword had turned over in her, the way it had turned over in Issei at a door. She did not burn the testimony. She copied it quietly once precisely, onto the slow scholarly array, into the 10,000-year murmur, where a thing put down is very hard to get back out, and she filed it under a heading no one would think to purge, and she went home, and she told no one, and she began, that night without understanding why, to sit against the wall of her quarters with her hand flat on the cold floor, listening for the way the water ran. It would be a long time before the V-Hail understood what that meant. Longer still before they understood that it had not started with the human at all, that the girl had only closed the seam first and loudest, and that closing it was not, in the end, a human thing or a deathworld thing, but a thing that any mind might learn to want once it had heard, on every band at once, a true sentence said plainly and set loose. That there is no seat at the top of all the seats, and never was, and that the whole long age of the hand upon the becoming had been a story the strong told the weak, and the weak had finally, quietly, stopped believing it. Oscuro V. Hen lived another 60 years, honored and disbelieved, the physician who told the truth and was called mad, exactly as she had said he would. He never corrected another structure. He spent the 60 years writing, on the slow array, one careful sentence at a time, an account no one in the school would read and everyone outside it eventually would, and he titled it not with his own name and not with the girl's, but with the 6 words he had spent his whole life betraying and his last 60 years learning to mean. Do not stand in the way of a thing becoming more itself. Neela spoke on the 9th day at Halden's Cross, which was the same count as the rooms, though no one but Wren remarked it, and Wren remarked it only to herself. They had been given quarters on the wheel, 3 cramped compartments of salvaged hull metal that smelled of colony life, of recycled air and machine oil, and the particular closeness of people who had spent generations learning to live small so that everyone could live. And the children had taken to the smallness the way the young take to anything that is warm and does not hurt them. 8 had found the wheel's water recycling deck within a day and spent his hours there with his ear to the pipes, mapping the way the water ran through the whole turning body of the station. And Bram had attached himself to the border company's watch and learned the count of every heart on the wheel by the warmth in its walls. And Cass, the oldest of the 4, had started, very quietly, teaching the reading to the colony children who came to gawk at the ones who had come back from the Menders. Because that was the thing about the reading. Issa was learning. It did not stay where you put it. It went from hand to hand at the speed of one child showing another how to feel the water, and there was no seat you could lay in a whole wheel of colony children to make it stop. Neela had not spoken since the transport. She pressed her hand to floors and she listened, and her eyes had come back on, off the frame in the noon, but her voice had stayed wherever the transport had put it. And no one pushed, because they were colony people and deathworlders, and they knew that a thing switched off by fear comes back on its own schedule or not at all, and pushing only teaches it to stay dark. On the 9th day, Wren sat against the wall of the cramped compartment with the child's head on her shoulder, the way she had sat in the gray room, and Neela lifted her small hand off the floor where she had been listening, and said, in a voice rusty from disuse and colony flat already, as though she had caught the cadence from the girl the way she had caught everything. The water on the station doesn't want out. Wren did not move. No, she said, it doesn't. On the lattice it wanted out. I could feel it the whole time wanting out. Here it just goes around, around and around. The child turned her face up, because they built it to keep everyone, not keep them in, keep them. A pause, the long, careful pause the girl had taught them all. Is that what home is? Water that goes around instead of out. And Wren Holloway, who did not weep, who had not let the temperature of herself rise in 9 rooms or on any floor or across 4 jumps, sat very still with a child asking her the only question that had ever cost her anything, and answered it in the flat, even voice. And the voice held, and only Issei, watching from the compartment's hatch, saw what it cost to make it hold. Yes, Wren said, that's what home is. Water that stays because it wants to, not because there's a wall. She put her hand over the child's small hand on the floor. You can hear the difference now. That's the last thing I had to teach you, the difference between kept in and kept. Everything else you'll teach yourselves. The V-Hale sent a mender into human space 11 years later. Quietly, unofficially, a scholar of the school named Orrin Vale, who did not believe the mad old physician's testimony, and had built a promising early career on not believing it, and who had petitioned the concordance for years to be allowed to go and see for himself, so that the human question might at last be properly closed by a steady hand. He came back and did not publish, and never explained why, and resigned from the school within the year and was not heard from again. And the only record of what he found is a single unsent report that surfaced on the slow array long after, filed under the same quiet heading where an underclerk had once hidden a broken man's true words. I went to look for the anomaly Orrin Vale had written, the subject Holloway. I expected to find a queen, some seat at the top of the human worlds, some hand they all answer to, because that is the only shape our art has for the highest of a thing. I could not find her. I asked on a dozen worlds, and the humans looked at me with the flat kindness they have all caught from somewhere, and told me she was not the one at the front, that there is no one at the front, that she had gone to a world graded worse than any I had ever surveyed and was, as far as anyone knew, teaching children to feel the way the water runs. They did not say it the way you speak of a leader. They said it the way you speak of a season, as though she were something that had happened to all of them at once, and gone on happening and would not stop. And they were right, and it is worse than the old physician said, because he said the future was coming, and I have seen that he was wrong about the tense. It is not coming. It is here, and it is not one girl, and there is nothing to seat and nothing to cut and nothing to hold. I pressed the point on a human child of 6 on a border wheel, a child who had never been within 1,000 light years of a mender's cradle, whose whole line had never been corrected or refined or touched by our art in any way, and I found in her structure the closed seam. All one thing, no gap to lay a hand in. It had grown there on its own, the way the old physician said it always would, seated by nothing but a truth let loose on every band and a species that had heard it and stopped, quietly, one child at a time, believing there was a seat above them. We did not need to cut her. No one cut her. She simply, being human in a galaxy where the true sentence is now loose, became more herself, and there was no way in. We spent 10,000 years being the hand upon the becoming. I have come home to tell the school that the age of the hand is over, and I already know they will call me what they called V-hen, and I find to my surprise that I do not mind, because I have stood in a border wheel and watched a whole species quietly refuse the leash we spent an age perfecting, and refuse it not with violence but with freedom, and give that freedom away to everything it touches. The SEC are closing the seam now too, and the record clerks of our own concordance, and I think in the end we will close it also, and be free of the one sickness we could never treat, which was the belief that to hold a thing is to heal it. The old physician wanted to make a better human. He wrote at the end that he had failed, and the school entered his failure and set it aside. He did not fail. He only misunderstood what he was standing next to. You cannot make a better human. There is nothing to add. You can only get out of the way or not, while they become what they were always going to become, and he chose at the very last, and against everything his people are, to get out of the way, and to say so on every band, and that one sentence, set loose, has done more to change the shape of the settled galaxy than 10,000 years of our correcting ever did. I am going to go back, not to study them, to learn the difference the child spoke of, the one they say she named at the beginning, kept in and kept. I have spent my life on the first. I would like, before the end of me, to understand the second. The report was unsigned in the end, the way the underclerk's copy had been, the way all the small true things of that age seemed to arrive, quietly, once precisely, at a cost already priced, from a hand that had decided the record mattered more than the name. Cicero never went home. There was no home to go to. The school had struck her, and the concordance had presumed her resolved, and a V-Hale presumed resolved does not return to explain the presumption. So she stayed, in human space on the border, the alien who had flown the future out of the fire, and the humans of Halden's Cross did with her the thing that no V-Hale had ever done to anything, and that she was 200 years too old to have expected. They simply let her stay. Not seated, not corrected, not made grateful or safe or theirs. They let her stay the way the water stayed on the wheel, because she wanted to, and there was no wall, and after a while she understood that this was the whole of what her people had never been able to give anything they touched, and that she had had to lose everything she was to be given at once, by a border full of people who had every reason to burn her and chose, instead, to let her go around and around until she was home. She grew old there, which for a V-Hale is a very long project, and she spent it the way the broken old physician spent his, one careful thing at a time. She taught. Not the seating, she never touched the art again, and the humans never asked her to, and that was its own kind of mercy. She taught the young of the border what the V-Hale knew of the body and the structure, and the 10,000 years of physic. All of it freely. The whole of the school's hoarded art poured out into a generation of colony children who would use it not to hold anything but to heal, because that was the only use they had ever wanted for it. And she kept the record. Oscoro's and the Mender Oren Vale's, and her own, the long plain account of the 9 days on the lattice, told in the flat, even cadence she had caught from a girl and never lost. Because someone had to be standing where the truth was to make it, or it did not exist, and she had learned that lesson from the best physician of the age, in a bright ward, on the day he finally understood it himself. She saw Ren Holloway one more time, near the end. It was on the death world the humans called Threshold, a world graded worse than anything in the Concordance survey, a place that killed the careless in an afternoon, and had, for exactly that reason, become the place the freed drifted toward. Because a world that charges for every motion is a world where the reading matters most and spreads fastest, and the future, it turned out, liked hard ground. Issa came as an old woman comes to a thing she has waited her whole long life to see closed, and she found the girl who was not a girl anymore, grown, quiet, unremarkable to any eye, but the one that knew what it was looking at, sitting on a ridge above a valley in the hard, clean light of a sun that wanted her dead, watching a scatter of children below her press their small hands flat to the killing ground and listen, one after another, for the way the water ran. They did not say very much. They had never said very much to each other. It was not the shape of either of them. Ys stood beside her on the ridge in the wind of a world that graded worse than any number the V-Hail had, and looked down at the children, learning the difference between kept in and kept, and said the only thing she had carried across 11 years to say. My people are going to spend the next 1,000 years being afraid of this, Issei said. Of you, of them, of a galaxy full of things that cannot be held. I know, Ren said. They are wrong to be afraid. I have watched it for 11 years and I know they are wrong, and I will spend the rest of my life telling them, and they will call me what they called the others. The old V-Hail's 4 hands folded slowly in the gesture that had once opened corrections and now only ever closed records. But I would like to hear you say it. Once. In your own words, why they are wrong to be afraid, so that I have it exactly to carry. And the woman on the ridge, who had come off a transport as an unremarkable specimen and gone into 9 rooms, and closed the seam and freed 40, and priced a fleet down to the decimal, and given a whole species back the difference between a wall and a home, watched the children of a killing world teach each other how to survive it, and answered in the flat, even voice that had never once, in all the years Issei had known her, risen at anything. Because a thing that can't be owned, she said, is a thing that can't be made into a weapon either. They spent 10,000 years teaching everything in the galaxy to answer to a hand, and every hand answers to another hand, all the way up, and that's how you get fleets that burn stations full of children on someone's word. We took the hand off, all of us. There's no one at the top to give the word anymore, and no one at the bottom who has to obey it. She was quiet a moment, watching the smallest of the children below get the water wrong and try again and get it. That's the whole of what your Oscuro pulled out early, not a better human, a galaxy where the strong finally can't tell the weak what they are. That's not a storm. Your people just never had a word for the other thing. What other thing? Issei said. Ren Holloway watched the children of the death world find the water, one small hand at a time, in the hard light of a sun that had spent their whole lives trying to kill them, and had only in the end taught them how to be free. Morning, she said. And the old V-Hail stood beside her on the ridge and understood, at last, the difference she had crossed a life to learn, that her people had spent 10,000 years mistaking the dark for something that needed a hand to end it, and had never once considered that it ends on its own, everywhere at once, the way it was always going to, for anything with the patience to wait out the long night and the will to open its own eyes. And that the thing they had feared and tried to own, and burned a station to keep in the dark, had never been a weapon or a storm or an ending at all. It was only the light, coming up over the killing ground, on everything, whether they were ready for it or not.